Chapter 7 of the Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 7. And is this Yarrow? This the stream of which my fancy cherished? So faithfully a waking dream, an image that hath perished? Oh, that some minstrel's harp were near, to utter notes of gladness, and chase this silence from the air that fills my heart with sadness. Attributed to Wordsworth. The scene was not without its sublimity, and the ardent, generous-minded Mabel felt her blood thrill in her veins and her cheeks flush as the canoe shot into the strength of the stream to quit the spot. The darkness of the night had lessened by the dispersion of the clouds, but the overhanging woods rendered the shore so obscure that the boats floated down the current in a belt of gloom that effectually secured them from detection. Still, there was necessarily a strong feeling of insecurity in all on board them, and even Jasper, who by this time began to tremble, on behalf of the girl, at every unusual sound that arose from the forest, kept casting uneasy glances around him as he drifted on in company. The paddle was used lightly, and only with exceeding care, for the slightest sound in the breathing stillness of that hour and place might apprise the watchful ears of the Iroquois of their position. All these accessories added to the impressive grandeur of her situation, and contributed to render the moment much the most exciting which had ever occurred in the brief existence of Mabel Dunham. Spirited, accustomed to self-reliance, and sustained by the pride of considering herself a soldier's daughter, she could hardly be said to be under the influence of fear, yet her heart often beat quicker than common, her fine blue eye lighted with an exhibition of a resolution that was wasted in the darkness, and her quickened feelings came in aid of the real sublimity that belonged to the scene and to the incidents of the night. "Mabel," said the suppressed voice of Jasper, as the two canoes floated so near each other that the hand of the young man held them together, "you have no dread? You trust freely to our care and willingness to protect you?" "I am a soldier's daughter, as you know, Jasper Western, and ought to be ashamed to confess fear." "Rely on me, on us all. Your uncle, Pathfinder, the Delaware, were the poor fellow here, I myself will risk everything rather than harm should reach you." "I believe you, Jasper," returned the girl, her hand unconsciously playing in the water. "I know that my uncle loves me, and will never think of himself until he has first thought of me, and I believe you are all my father's friends, and would willingly assist his child. But I am not so feeble and weak-minded as you may think, for, though only a girl from the towns, and like most of that class, a little disposed to see danger where there is none, I promise you, Jasper, no foolish fears of mine shall stand in the way of your doing your duty." "The sergeant's daughter is right, and she is worthy of being honest Thomas Dunham's child," put in the Pathfinder. "Ah's me, pretty one, many is the time that your father and I have scouted and marched together on the flanks and rear of the enemy, in nights darker than this, and that, too, when we did not know but the next moment would lead us into a bloody ambushment. I was at his side when he got the wound in his shoulder, and the honest fellow will tell you, when you meet, the manner in which we contrived to cross the river which lay in our rear, in order to save his scalp." "He has told me," said Mabel, with more energy perhaps than her situation rendered prudent. "I have his letters, in which he has mentioned all that, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the service. God will remember it, Pathfinder, and there is no gratitude that you can ask of the daughter which she will not cheerfully repay for her father's life." "Ay, that is the way with all your gentle and pure-hearted creatures. I have seen some of you before, and have heard of others. The sergeant himself has talked to me of his own young days, and of your mother, and of the manner in which he courted her, and of all the crossings and disappointments, until he succeeded at last.
My mother did not live long to repay him for what he did to win her," said Mabel, with a trembling lip.
So he tells me. The honest sergeant has kept nothing back, for being so many years my senior, he has looked on me, in our many scoutings together, as a sort of son.
"Perhaps, Pathfinder," observed Jasper, with a huskiness in his voice that defeated the attempt at pleasantry, "he would be glad to have you for one in reality."
And if he did, Eau douce, where would be the sin of it? He knows what I am on a trail or a scout, and he has seen me often face to face with the Frenchers. I have sometimes thought, lad, that we all ought to seek for wives, for the man that lives altogether in the woods, and in company with his enemies, or his prey, gets to lose some of the feeling of kind in the end. It is not easy to dwell always in the presence of God, and not feel the power of his goodness. I have attended church service in the garrisons, and tried hard, as becomes a true soldier, to join in the prayers; for, though no enlisted servant of the king, I fight his battles and sarve his cause, and so I have endeavored to worship garrison fashion, but never could raise within me the solemn feelings and true affection that I feel when alone with God in the forest. There I seem to stand face to face with my Master. All around me is fresh and beautiful, as it came from his hand, and there is no nicety or doctrine to chill the feelings. No, no, the woods are the true temple after all, but there the thoughts are free to mount higher even than the clouds." "You speak the truth, Master Pathfinder," said Cap, "and a truth that all who live much in solitude know. What, for instance, is the reason that seafaring men in general are so religious and conscientious in all they do, but the fact that they are so often alone with Providence, and have so little to do with the wickedness of the land? Many and many is the time that I have stood my watch, under the equator perhaps, or in the Southern Ocean, when the nights are lighted up with the fires of heaven, and that is a time, I can tell you, my hearties, to bring a man to his bearings in the way of his sins. I have rattled down mine again and again under such circumstances, until the shrouds and lanyards of conscience have fairly creaked with the strain. I agree with you, Master Pathfinder, therefore, in saying, if you want a truly religious man, go to sea or go into the woods."
"Uncle, I thought seamen had little credit generally for their respect for religion?"
"All damned slander, girl! For all the essentials of Christianity the seaman beats the landsman hand over hand." "I will not answer for all this, Master Cap," returned Pathfinder, "but I dare say some of it may be true. I want no thunder and lightning to remind me of my God, nor am I as apt to bethink on most of all his goodness in trouble and tribulations, as on a calm, solemn, quiet day in a forest, when his voice is heard in the creaking of a dead branch, or in the song of a bird, as much in my ears, at least, as it is ever heard in uproars and gales. How is it with you, Eau douce? You face the tempest as well as Master Cap, and ought to know something of the feelings of storms."
"I fear that I am much too young and too inexperienced to be able to say much on such a subject," modestly answered Jasper. "But you have your feelings," said Mabel quickly. "You cannot, no one can live among such scenes without feeling how much they ought to trust in God." "I shall not belie my training so much as to say I do not sometimes think of these things, but I fear it is not so often or as much as I ought."
"Fresh water," returned Cap pithily. "You are not to expect too much of the young man, Mabel. I think they call you sometimes by a name that would insinuate all this. Eau de vie, is it not?"
"Eau douce," quietly replied Jasper, who from sailing on the lake had acquired a knowledge of French, as well as of several of the Indian dialects. "It is a name the Iroquois have given me to distinguish me from some of my companions who once sailed upon the sea, and are fond of filling the ears of the natives with stories of their great salt-water lakes."
"And why shouldn't they?
"I dare say they do the savages no harm."
"Ay, ay, Eau douce, that must mean the white brandy,
"Which may well enough be called the deuce, for deuced stuff it is." "The signification of eau douce is sweet water, and it is the manner in which the French express fresh water," rejoined Jasper, a little nettled.
And how the devil do they make water out of eau in douce, when it means brandy and eau de vie? Besides, among seamen, eau always means brandy, and eau de vie, brandy of a high proof. I think nothing of your ignorance, young man, for it is natural to your situation and cannot be helped. If you will return with me, and make a voyage or two on the Atlantic, it will serve you a good turn in the remainder of your days, and Mabel there, and all the other young women near the coast, will think all the better of you should you live to be as old as one of the trees in this forest." "Nay, nay," interrupted the single-hearted and generous guide. "Jasper wants not for friends in this region, I can assure you; and though seeing the world, according to his habits, may do him good as well as another, we shall think none the worse of him if he never quits us. Eau douce or eau de vie, he is a brave, true-hearted youth, and I always sleep as soundly when he is on the watch as if I was up and stirring myself. Ay, and for that matter, sounder too. The sergeant's daughter here doesn't believe it necessary for the lad to go to sea in order to make a man of him, or one who is worthy to be respected and esteemed." Mabel made no reply to this appeal, and she even looked towards the western shore, although the darkness rendered the natural movements unnecessary to conceal her face. But Jasper felt that there was a necessity for his saying something, the pride of youth and manhood revolting at the idea of his being in a condition not to command the respect of his fellows or the smiles of his equals of the other sex. Still, he was unwilling to utter aught that might be considered harsh to the uncle of Mabel, and his self-command was perhaps more creditable than his modesty and spirit. "I pretend not to things I don't possess," he said, "and lay no claim to any knowledge of the ocean or of navigation. We steer by the stars and the compass on these lakes, running from headland to headland, and having little need of figures and calculations, make no use of them. But we have our claims notwithstanding, as I have often heard from those who have passed years on the ocean. In the first place, we have always the land aboard, and much of the time on a lee shore, and that I have frequently heard makes hardy sailors. Our gales are sudden and severe, and we are compelled to run for our ports at all hours." "You have your leads," interrupted Cap. "They are of little use, and are seldom cast." "The deep seas." "I have heard of such things, but confess I never saw one." "Oh, deuce with a vengeance! A trader and no deep sea! Why, boy, you cannot pretend to be anything of a mariner. Who the devil ever heard of a seaman without his deep sea?" "I do not pretend to any particular skill, Master Cap." "Except in shooting falls, Jasper, except in shooting falls and rifts," said Pathfinder, coming to the rescue, "in which business even you, Master Cap, must allow he has some handiness. In my judgment, every man is to be esteemed or condemned according to his gifts, and if Master Cap is useless in running the Oswego Falls, I try to remember that he is useful when out of sight of land, and if Jasper be useless when out of sight of land, I do not forget that he has a true eye and steady hand when running the falls." "But Jasper is not useless, would not be useless when out of sight of land," said Mabel, with a spirit and energy that caused her clear, sweet voice to be startling amid the solemn stillness of that extraordinary scene. "No one can be useless there who can do so much here, is what I mean, though, I dare say, he is not as well acquainted with ships as my uncle." "Ay, bolster each other up in your ignorance," returned Cap with a sneer. "We seamen are so much outnumbered when ashore that it is seldom we get our dues. But when you want to be defended, or trade is to be carried on, there is outcry enough for us."
"But, uncle, landsmen do not come to attack our coasts, so that seamen only meet seamen."
"So much for ignorance. Where are all the enemies that have landed in this country, French and English, let me inquire, niece?" "Sure enough, where are they?" ejaculated Pathfinder. "None can tell better than we who dwell in the woods, Master Cap. I have often followed their line of march by bones bleaching in the rain, and have found their trail by graves, years after they and their pride have vanished together. Generals and privates, they lay scattered throughout the land, so many proofs of what men are when led on by their love of great names and the wish to be more than their fellows." "I must say, Master Pathfinder, that you sometimes utter opinions that are a little remarkable for a man who lives by the rifle, seldom snuffing the air but he smells gunpowder, or turning out of his berth but to bear down on an enemy." "If you think I pass my days in warfare against my kind, you know neither me nor my history. The man that lives in the woods and on the frontiers must take the chances of the things among which he dwells. For this I am not accountable, being but an humble and powerless hunter and scout and guide. My real calling is to hunt for the army, on its marches and in times of peace, although I am more especially engaged in the service of one officer, who is now absent in the settlements, where I never follow him. No, no, bloodshed and warfare are not my real gifts, but peace and mercy. Still, I must face the enemy as well as another, and as for a Mingo, I look upon him as man looks on a snake, a creature to be put beneath the heel whenever a fitting occasion offers." "Well, well, I have mistaken your calling, which I had thought as regularly warlike as that of a ship's gunner. There is my brother-in-law, now, he has been a soldier since he was 16, and he looks upon his trade as every way as respectable as that of a seafaring man, a point I hardly think is worth while to dispute with him."
"My father has been taught to believe that it is honorable to carry arms," said Mabel, "for his father was a soldier before him."
"Yes, yes," resumed the guide. "Most of the sergeant's gifts are martial, and he looks at most things in this world over the barrel of his musket. One of his notions now is to prefer a king's piece to a regular double-sighted long-barreled rifle. Such conceits will come over men from long habit, and prejudice is, perhaps, the commonest failing of a human nature." While the desultory conversation just related had been carried on in subdued voices, the canoes were dropping slowly down with the current within the deep shadows of the western shore, the paddles being used merely to preserve the desired direction and proper positions. The strength of the stream varied materially, the water being seemingly still in places, while in other reaches it flowed at a rate exceeding 2 or even 3 miles in the hour. On the rifts it even dashed forward with a velocity that was appalling to the unpractised eye. Jasper was of the opinion that they might drift down with the current to the mouth of the river in 2 hours from the time they left the shore, and he and the Pathfinder had agreed on the expediency of suffering the canoes to float of themselves for a time, or at least until they had passed the first dangers of their new movement. The dialogue had been carried on in voices, too, guardedly low, for though the quiet of deep solitude reigned in that vast and nearly boundless forest, Nature was speaking with her 1,000 tongues in the eloquent language of night in a wilderness. The air sighed through 10,000 trees, the water rippled, and at places even roared along the shores, and now and then was heard the creaking of a branch or a trunk as it rubbed against some object similar to itself, under the vibrations of a nicely balanced body. All living sounds had ceased. Once, it is true, the Pathfinder fancied he heard the howl of a distant wolf, of which a few prowled through these woods, but it was a transient and doubtful cry that might possibly have been attributed to the imagination. When he desired his companions, however, to cease talking, His vigilant ear had caught the peculiar sound which is made by the parting of a dried branch of a tree, and which, if his senses did not deceive him, came from the western shore. All who are accustomed to that particular sound will understand how readily the ear receives it, and how easy it is to distinguish the tread which breaks the branch from every other noise of the forest. "There is the footstep of a man on the bank," said Pathfinder to Jasper, speaking in neither a whisper nor yet in a voice loud enough to be heard at any distance. "Can the accursed Iroquois have crossed the river already, with their arms and without a boat?" "It may be the Delaware. He would follow us, of course, down this bank, and would know where to look for us. Let me draw closer into the shore and reconnoitre." "Go, boy, but be light with the paddle, and on no account venture ashore on an uncertainty." "Is this prudent?" demanded Mabel, with an impetuosity that rendered her incautious in modulating her sweet voice. "Very imprudent, if you speak so loud, fair one. I like your voice, which is soft and pleasing, after the listening so long to the tones of men, but it must not be heard too much or too freely just now. Your father, the honest sergeant, will tell you when you meet him, that silence is a double virtue on a trail. Go, Jasper, and do justice to your own character for prudence." 10 anxious minutes succeeded the disappearance of the canoe of Jasper, which glided away from that of the Pathfinder so noiselessly that it had been swallowed up in the gloom before Mabel allowed herself to believe the young man would really venture alone on a service which struck her imagination as singularly dangerous. During this time the party continued to float with the current, no one speaking, and it might almost be said, no one breathing, so strong was the general desire to catch the minutest sound that should come from the shore. But the same solemn, we might indeed say sublime, quiet reigned as before, the washing of the water as it piled up against some slight obstruction, and the sighing of the trees alone interrupting the slumbers of the forest. At the end of the period mentioned, the snapping of the dried branches was again faintly heard, and the Pathfinder fancied that the sound of smothered voices reached him. "I may be mistaken," he said, "for the thoughts often fancy what the heart wishes, but these were notes like the low tones of the Delaware." "Do the dead of the savages ever walk?" demanded Cap. "Ay, and run too in their happy hunting grounds, but nowhere else. A redskin finishes with the earth, after the breath quits the body. It is not one of his gifts to linger around his wigwam when his hour has passed." "I see some object on the water," whispered Mabel, whose eye had not ceased to dwell on the body of gloom, with close intensity, since the disappearance of Jasper. "It is the canoe," returned the guide, greatly relieved. "All must be safe, or we should have heard from the lad." In another minute the two canoes, which became visible to those they carried only as they drew near each other, again floated side by side, and the form of Jasper was recognized at the stern of his own boat. The figure of a second man was seated in the bow, and as the young sailor so wielded his paddle as to bring the face of his companion near the eyes of the Pathfinder and Mabel, they both recognized the person of the Delaware. "Chingachgook, my brother!" said the guide, in the dialect of the other's people, a tremor shaking his voice that betrayed the strength of his feelings. "Chief of the Mohicans, my heart is very glad. Often have we passed through blood and strife together, but I was afraid it was never to be so again." "Humph! The Mingos are squaws. 3 of their scalps hang at my girdle. They do not know how to strike the great serpent of the Delawares. Their hearts have no blood, and their thoughts are on their return path, across the waters of the Great Lake." "Have you been among them, chief? And what has become of the warrior who was in the river?" "He has turned into a fish, and lies at the bottom with the eels. Let his brothers bait their hooks for him. Pathfinder, I have counted the enemy, and have touched their rifles."
"Ah, I thought he would be venturesome," exclaimed the guide in English. "The risky fellow has been in the midst of them, and has brought us back their whole history. Speak, Chingachgook, and I will make our friends as knowing as ourselves." The Delaware now related in a low, earnest manner the substance of all his discoveries, since he was last seen struggling with his foe in the river. Of the fate of his antagonist he said no more, it not being usual for a warrior to boast in his more direct and useful narratives. As soon as he had conquered in that fearful strife, however, he swam to the eastern shore, landed with caution, and wound his way in among the Iroquois, concealed by the darkness, undetected, and in the main even unsuspected. Once, indeed, he had been questioned, but answering that he was Arrowhead, no further inquiries were made. By the passing remarks he soon ascertained that the party was out expressly to intercept Mabel and her uncle, concerning whose rank, however, they had evidently been deceived. He also ascertained enough to justify the suspicion that Arrowhead had betrayed them to their enemies, for some motive that it was now not easy to reach, as he had not yet received the reward of his services. Pathfinder communicated no more of his intelligence to his companions than he thought might relieve their apprehensions, intimating at the same time that now was the moment for exertion, the Iroquois not having yet entirely recovered from the confusion created by their losses. "We shall find them at the rift, I make no manner of doubt," continued he, "and there it will be our fate to pass them, or to fall into their hands. The distance to the garrison will then be so short, that I have been thinking of a plan of landing with Mabel myself, that I may take her in by some of the byways, and leave the canoes to their chances in the rapids."
"It will never succeed, Pathfinder," eagerly interrupted Jasper. "Mabel is not strong enough to tramp in the woods in a night like this. Put her in my skiff, and I will lose my life, or carry her through the rift safely, dark as it is."
"No doubt you will, lad. No one doubts your willingness to do anything to serve the Sergeant's daughter; but it must be the eye of Providence, and not your own, that will take you safely through the Oswego rift in a night like this."
"And who will lead her safely to the garrison if she land? Is not the night as dark on shore as on the water? Or do you think I know less of my calling than you know of yours?"
"Spiritedly said, lad. But if I should lose my way in the dark, and I believe no man can say truly that such a thing ever yet happened to me, but if I should lose my way, no other harm would come of it than to pass a night in the forest, whereas a false turn of the paddle or a broad sheer of the canoe would put you and the young woman into the river, out of which it is more than probable the Sergeant's daughter would never come alive."
"I will leave it to Mabel herself. I am certain that she will feel more secure in the canoe." "I have great confidence in you both," answered the girl, "and have no doubts that either will do all he can to prove to my father how much he values him. But I confess I should not like to quit the canoe, with the certainty we have of there being enemies like those we have seen in the forest. But my uncle can decide for me in this matter."
"I have no liking for the woods," said Cap, "while one has a clear drift like this on the river. Besides, Master Pathfinder, to say nothing of the savages, you overlook the sharks." "Sharks! Who ever heard of sharks in the wilderness?" "Ay, sharks, or bears, or wolves, no matter what you call a thing, so it has the mind and power to bite." "Lord, Lord, man, do you dread any creature that is to be found in the American forest? A catamount is a skeary animal, I will allow, but then it is nothing in the hands of a practised hunter. Talk of the Mingos and their deviltries if you will, but do not raise a false alarm about bears and wolves." "Ay, ay, Master Pathfinder, this is all well enough for you, who probably know the name of every creature you would meet. Use is everything, and it makes a man bold when he might otherwise be bashful. I have known seamen in the low latitudes swim for hours at a time among sharks 15 or 20 feet long." "This is extraordinary!" exclaimed Jasper, who had not yet acquired that material part of his trade, the ability to spin a yarn. "I have always heard that it was certain death to venture in the water among sharks."
"I forgot to say that the lads always took capstan bars, or gunners' handspikes, or crows with them, to rap the beasts over the noses if they got to be troublesome. No, I have no liking for bears or wolves, though a whale, in my eye, is very much the same sort of fish as a red herring after it is dried and salted. Mabel and I had better stick to the canoe."
"Mabel would do well to change canoes," added Jasper. "This of mine is empty, and even Pathfinder will allow that my eye is surer than his own on the water."
"That I will, cheerfully, boy. The water belongs to your gifts, and no one will deny that you have improved them to the utmost. You are right enough in believing that the Sergeant's daughter will be safer in your canoe than in this, and though I would gladly keep near her myself, I have her welfare too much at heart not to give her honest advice. Bring your canoe close alongside, Jasper, and I will give you what you must consider as a precious treasure."
"I do so consider it," returned the youth, not losing a moment in complying with the request, when Mabel passed from one canoe to the other, taking her seat on the effects which had hitherto composed its sole cargo. As soon as this arrangement was made, the canoes separated a short distance, and the paddles were used, though with great care, to avoid making any noise. The conversation gradually ceased, and as the dreaded rift was approached, all became impressed with the gravity of the moment. That their enemies would endeavor to reach this point before them was almost certain, and it seemed so little probable any one should attempt to pass it, in the profound obscurity which reigned, that Pathfinder was confident parties were on both sides of the river, in the hope of intercepting them when they might land. He would not have made the proposal he did had he not felt sure of his own ability to convert this very anticipation of success into a means of defeating the plans of the Iroquois. As the arrangement now stood, however, everything depended on the skill of those who guided the canoes, for should either hit a rock, if not split asunder, it would almost certainly be upset, and then would come not only all the hazards of the river itself, but, for Mabel, the certainty of falling into the hands of her pursuers. The utmost circumspection consequently became necessary, and each one was too much engrossed with his own thoughts to feel a disposition to utter more than was called for by the exigencies of the case. As the canoes stole silently along, the roar of the rift became audible, and it required all the fortitude of Cap to keep his seat while these boding sounds were approached, amid a darkness which scarcely permitted a view of the outlines of the wooded shore and of the gloomy vault above his head. He retained a vivid impression of the falls, and his imagination was not now idle in swelling the dangers of the rift to a level with those of the headlong descent he had that day made, and even to increase them under the influence of doubt and uncertainty. In this, however, the old mariner was mistaken, for the Oswego rift and the Oswego falls are very different in their characters and violence, the former being no more than a rapid that glances among shallows and rocks, while the latter really deserved the name it bore, as has been already shown. Mabel certainly felt distrust and apprehension, but her entire situation was so novel, and her reliance on her guide so great, that she retained a self-command which might not have existed had she clearer perceptions of the truth, or been better acquainted with the helplessness of men when placed in opposition to the power and majesty of nature. "Is that the spot you have mentioned?" she said to Jasper, when the roar of the rift first came distinctly on her ears. "It is, and I beg you to have confidence in me. We are not old acquaintances, Mabel, but we live many days in one in this wilderness. I think already that I have known you years." "And I do not feel as if you were a stranger to me, Jasper. I have every reliance on your skill, as well as on your disposition to serve me." We shall see. Pathfinder is striking the rapids too near the centre of the river. The bed of the water is closer to the eastern shore, but I cannot make him hear me now. Hold firmly to the canoe, Mabel, and fear nothing." At the next moment the swift current had sucked them into the rift, and for 3 or 4 minutes the awestruck, rather than the alarmed girl, saw nothing around her but sheets of glancing foam, heard nothing but the roar of waters. 20 times did the canoe appear about to dash against some curling and bright wave that showed itself even amid that obscurity, and as often did it glide away again unharmed, impelled by the vigorous arm of him who governed its movements. Once, and once only, did Jasper seem to lose command of his frail bark, during which brief space it fairly whirled entirely round, but by a desperate effort he brought it again under control, recovered the lost channel, and was soon rewarded for all his anxiety by finding himself floating quietly in the deep water below the rapids, secure from every danger, and without having taken in enough of the element to serve for a draught. "All is over, Mabel," the young man cried cheerfully. "The danger is past, and you may now indeed hope to meet your father this very night." "God be praised! Jasper, we shall owe this great happiness to you. The Pathfinder may claim a full share in the merit, but what has become of the other canoe?" "I see something near us on the water. Is it not the boat of our friends?" A few strokes of the paddle brought Jasper to the side of the object in question. It was the other canoe, empty and bottom upwards. No sooner did the young man ascertain this fact than he began to search for the swimmers, and, to his great joy, Cap was soon discovered drifting down with the current, the old seaman preferring the chances of drowning to those of landing among savages. He was hauled into the canoe, though not without difficulty, and then the search ended, for Jasper was persuaded that the Pathfinder would wade to the shore, the water being shallow, in preference to abandoning his beloved rifle. The remainder of the passage was short, though made amid darkness and doubt. After a short pause a dull roaring sound was heard, which at times resembled the mutterings of distant thunder, and then again brought with it the washing of waters. Jasper announced to his companions that they now heard the surf of the lake. Low curved spits of land lay before them, into the bay formed by one of which the canoe glided, and then it shot up noiselessly upon a gravelly beach. The transition that followed was so hurried and great that Mabel scarcely knew what passed. In the course of a few minutes, however, sentinels had been passed, a gate was opened, and the agitated girl found herself in the arms of a parent who was almost a stranger to her. End of chapter. Chapter 8 of The Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 8. A land of love and a land of light, withouten sun or moon or night, where the river swallowed a living stream, and the light a pure celestial beam, the land of vision it would seem, a still, an everlasting dream. From The Queen's Wake. The rest that succeeds fatigue, and which attends a newly awakened sense of security, is generally sweet and deep. Such was the fact with Mabel, who did not rise from her humble pallet, such a bed as a sergeant's daughter might claim in a remote frontier post, until long after the garrison had obeyed the usual summons of the drums, and had assembled at the morning parade. Sergeant Dunham, on whose shoulders fell the task of attending to these ordinary and daily duties, had got through all his morning avocations, and was beginning to think of his breakfast, before his child left her room, and came into the fresh air, equally bewildered, delighted, and grateful,
at the novelty and security of her new situation. At the time of which we are writing, Oswego was one of the extreme frontier posts of the British possessions on this continent. It had not long been occupied, and was garrisoned by a battalion of a regiment which had been originally Scotch, but into which many Americans had been received since its arrival in this country, all innovation that had led the way to Mabel's father filling the humble but responsible situation of the oldest sergeant. A few young officers also, who were natives of the colonies, were to be found in the corps. The fort itself, like most works of that character, was better adapted to resist an attack of savages than to withstand a regular siege, but the great difficulty of transporting heavy artillery and other necessaries rendered the occurrence of the latter a probability so remote as scarcely to enter into the estimate of the engineers who had planned the defences. There were bastions of earth and logs, a dry ditch, a stockade, a parade of considerable extent, and barracks of logs that answered the double purpose of dwellings and fortifications. A few light field pieces stood in the area of the fort, ready to be conveyed to any point where they might be wanted, and one or two heavy iron guns looked out from the summits of the advanced angles, as so many admonitions to the audacious to respect their power. When Mabel, quitting the convenient but comparatively retired hut where her father had been permitted to place her, issued into the pure air of the morning, she found herself at the foot of a bastion, which lay invitingly before her, with a promise of giving a coup d'oeil of all that had been concealed in the darkness of the preceding night. Tripping up the grassy ascent, the light-hearted as well as light-footed girl found herself at once on a point where the sight, at a few varying glances, could take in all the external novelties of her new situation. To the southward lay the forest, through which she had been journeying so many weary days, and which had proved so full of dangers. It was separated from the stockade by a belt of open land that had been principally cleared of its woods to form the martial constructions around her. This glacis, for such in fact was its military use, might have covered 100 acres, but with it every sign of civilization ceased. All beyond was forest, that dense, interminable forest which Mabel could now picture to herself, through her recollections, with its hidden glassy lakes, its dark rolling stream, and its world of nature. Turning from this view, our heroine felt her cheek fanned by a fresh and grateful breeze, such as she had not experienced since quitting the far distant coast. Here a new scene presented itself. Although expected, it was not without a start, and a low exclamation indicative of pleasure, that the eagle eyes of the girl drank in its beauties. To the north and east and west, in every direction, in short, over one entire half of the novel panorama, lay a field of rolling waters. The element was neither of that glassy green which distinguishes the American waters in general, nor yet of the deep blue of the ocean, the color being of a slightly amber hue, which scarcely affected its limpidity. No land was to be seen, with the exception of the adjacent coast, which stretched to the right and left in an unbroken outline of forest, with wide bays and low headlands of points. Still, much of the shore was rocky, and into its caverns the sluggish waters occasionally rolled, producing a hollow sound, which resembled the concussions of a distant gun. No sail whitened the surface, no whale or other fish gambolled on its bosom. No sign of use or service rewarded the longest and most minute gaze at its boundless expanse. It was a scene, on one side, of apparently endless forests, while a waste of seemingly interminable water spread itself on the other. Nature appeared to have delighted in producing grand effects, by setting two of her principal agents in bold relief to each other, neglecting details. The eye turned from the broad carpet of leaves to the still broader field of fluid, from the endless but gentle heavings of the lake to the holy calm and poetical solitude of the forest, with wonder and delight.
Mabel Dunham, though unsophisticated, like most of her countrywomen of that period, and ingenuous and frank as any warm-hearted and sincere-minded girl well could be, was not altogether without a feeling for the poetry of this beautiful earth of ours. Although she could scarcely be said to be educated at all, for few of her sex at that day and in this country received much more than the rudiments of plain English instruction, still she had been taught much more than was usual for young women in her own station in life, and, in one sense certainly, she did credit to her teaching. The widow of a field officer, who formerly belonged to the same regiment as her father, had taken the girl in charge at the death of its mother, and under the care of this lady Mabel had acquired some taste and many ideas which otherwise might always have remained strangers to her. Her situation in the family had been less that of a domestic than of a humble companion, and the results were quite apparent in her attire, her language, her sentiments, and even in her feelings, though neither, perhaps, rose to the level of those that would probably characterize a lady. She had lost the less refined habits and manners of one in her original position, without having quite reached a point that disqualified her for the situation in life that the accidents of birth and fortune would probably compel her to fill. All else that was distinctive and peculiar in her belonged to natural character. With such antecedents it will occasion the reader no wonder if he learns that Mabel viewed the novel scene before her with a pleasure far superior to that produced by vulgar surprise. She felt its ordinary beauties as most would have felt them, but she had also a feeling for its sublimity, for that softened solitude, that calm grandeur and eloquent repose, which ever pervades broad views of natural objects yet undisturbed by the labors and struggles of man. "How beautiful!" she exclaimed, unconscious of speaking, as she stood on the solitary bastion, facing the air from the lake, and experiencing the genial influence of its freshness pervading both her body and her mind. "How very beautiful, and yet how singular!" The words and the train of her ideas were interrupted by a touch of a finger on her shoulder, and turning, in the expectation of seeing her father, Mabel found Pathfinder at her side. He was leaning quietly on his long rifle, and laughing in his quiet manner, while, with an outstretched arm, he swept over the whole panorama of land and water. "Here you have both our domains," said he, "Jasper's and mine. The lake is for him, and the woods are for me. The lad sometimes boasts of the breadth of his dominions, but I tell him my trees make as broad a plain on the face of this 'arth as all his water. Well, Mabel, you are fit for either, but I do not see that fear of the Mingos or night marches can destroy your pretty looks."
"It is a new character for the Pathfinder to appear in, to compliment a silly girl."
"Not silly, Mabel, no, not in the least silly. The sergeant's daughter would do discredit to her worthy father were she to do or say anything that could be called silly."
"Then she must take care, and not put too much faith in treacherous, flattering words. But, Pathfinder, I rejoice to see you among us again; for, though Jasper did not seem to feel much uneasiness, I was afraid some accident might have happened to you and your friend on that frightful rift."
"The lad knows us both, and was sartain that we should not drown, which is scarcely one of my gifts. It would have been hard swimming of a sartainty with a long-barreled rifle in the hand, and what between the game, and the savages and the French, Killdeer and I have gone through too much in company to part very easily. No, we waded ashore, the rift being shallow enough for that, with small exceptions, and we landed with our arms in our hands. We had to take our time for it, on account of the Iroquois, I will own. But, as soon as the skulking vagabonds saw the lights that the sergeant sent down to your canoe, we well understood they would decamp, since a visit might have been expected from some of the garrison.
So it was only sitting patiently on the stones for an hour, and all the danger was over. Patience is the greatest of virtues in a woodsman."
"I rejoice to hear this, for fatigue itself would scarcely make me sleep, for thinking of what might befall you."
"Lord bless your tender little heart, Mabel! But this is the way with all you gentle ones. I must say, on my part, however, that I was right glad to see the lanterns come down to the waterside, which I knew to be a sure sign of your safety. We hunters and guides are rude beings, but we have our feelings and our ideas, as well as any general in the army. Both Jasper and I would have died before you should have come to harm. We would."
"I thank you for all you did for me, Pathfinder. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you, and, depend on it, my father shall know it. I have already told him much, but have still a duty to perform on this subject."
"Tush, Mabel! The Sergeant knows what the woods be, and what men, true red men, be too. There is little need to tell him anything about it. Well, now you have met your father, do you find the honest old soldier the sort of person you expected to find?"
"He is my own dear father, and received me as a soldier and a father should receive a child. Have you known him long, Pathfinder?"
"That is as people count time. I was just 12 when the Sergeant took me on my first scouting, and that is now more than 20 years ago. We had a tramping time of it. And, as it was before your day, you should have had no father, had not the rifle been one of my natural gifts."
"Explain yourself."
"It is too simple for many words. We were ambushed, and the Sergeant got a bad hurt, and would have lost his scalp, but for a sort of inbred turn I took to the weapon. We brought him off, however, and a handsomer head of hair, for his time of life, is not to be found in the regiment than the Sergeant carries about with him this blessed day."
"You saved my father's life, Pathfinder!" exclaimed Mabel, unconsciously, though warmly, taking one of his hard, sinewy hands into both her own. "God bless you for this, too, among your other good acts."
"Nay, I did not say that much, though I believe I did save his scalp. A man might live without a scalp, and so I cannot say I saved his life. Jasper may say that much consarning you, but without his eye and arm the canoe would never have passed the rift in safety on a night like the last. The gifts of the lad are for the water, while mine are for the hunt and the trail. He is yonder, in the cove there, looking after the canoes, and keeping his eye on his beloved little craft. To my eye, there is no likelier youth in these parts than Jasper Western." For the first time since she had left her room, Mabel now turned her eyes beneath her, and got a view of what might be called the foreground of the remarkable picture she had been studying with so much pleasure. The Oswego threw its dark waters into the lake, between banks of some height, that on the eastern side being bolder and projecting farther north than that on its western. The fort was on the latter, and immediately beneath it were a few huts of logs, which, as they could not interfere with the defence of the place, had been erected along the strand for the purpose of receiving and containing such stores as were landed, or were intended to be embarked, in the communications between the different ports on the shores of Ontario. Two low, curved, gravelly points had been formed with surprising regularity by the counteracting forces of the northerly winds and the swift current, and, inclining from the storms of the lake, formed two coves within the river. That on the western side was the most deeply indented, and, as it also had the most water, it formed a sort of picturesque little port for the post. It was along the narrow strand that lay between the low height of the fort and the water of this cove that the rude buildings just mentioned had been erected. Several skiffs, bateaux, and canoes were hauled up on the shore, and in the cove itself lay the little craft from which Jasper obtained his claim to be considered a sailor. She was cutter rigged, might have been of 40 tons burthen, was so neatly constructed and painted as to have something of the air of a vessel of war, though entirely without quarters, and rigged and sparred with so scrupulous a regard to proportions and beauty, as well as fitness and judgment, as to give her an appearance that even Mabel at once distinguished to be gallant and trim. Her mould was admirable, for a wright of great skill had sent her drafts from England, at the express request of the officer who had caused her to be constructed. Her paint dark, warlike, and neat, and the long coach-whip pennant that she wore at once proclaimed her to be the property of the king. Her name was the Scud.
"That, then, is the vessel of Jasper," said Mabel, who associated the master of the little craft very naturally with the cutter itself. "Are there many others on this lake?"
The Frenchers have 3, one of which they tell me is a real ship, such as are used on the ocean, another a brig, and a third is a cutter, like the Scud here, which they call the Squirrel, in their own tongue, however, and which seems to have a natural hatred of our own pretty boat, for Jasper seldom goes out that the Squirrel is not at his heels.
"And is Jasper one to run from a Frenchman, though he appears in the shape of a squirrel, and that, too, on the water?"
Of what use would valor be without the means of turning it to account? Jasper is a brave boy, as all on this frontier know, but he has no gun except a little howitzer, and then his crew consists only of 2 men besides himself, and a boy. I was with him in one of his trapeuzes, and the youngster was risky enough, for he brought us so near the enemy that rifles began to talk. But the Frenchers carry cannon and ports, and never show their faces outside of Frontenac, without having some 20 men, besides their Squirrel, in their cutter. No, this Scud was built for flying, and the Major says he will not put her in a fighting humor by giving her men and arms, lest she should take him at his word, and get her wings clipped. I know little of these things, for my gifts are not at all in that way, but I see the reason of the thing. I see its reason, though Jasper does not.
"Ah, here is my uncle, none the worse for his swim, come to look at this inland sea."
Sure enough, Cap, who had announced his approach by a couple of lusty hems, now made his appearance on the bastion, where, after nodding to his niece and her companion, he made a deliberate survey of the expanse of water before him. In order to effect this at his ease, the mariner mounted on one of the old iron guns, folded his arms across his breast, and balanced his body, as if he felt the motion of a vessel. To complete the picture, he had a short pipe in his mouth. "Well, Master Cap?" asked the Pathfinder innocently, for he did not detect the expression of contempt that was gradually settling on the features of the other. "Is it not a beautiful sheet, and fit to be named a sea?" "This, then, is what you call your lake?" demanded Cap, sweeping the northern horizon with his pipe. "I say, is this really your lake?" "Sartain, and if the judgment of one who has lived on the shores of many others can be taken, a very good lake it is." "Just as I expected. A pond in dimensions, and a scuttle-butt in taste. It is all in vain to travel inland, in the hope of seeing anything either full-grown or useful. I knew it would turn out just in this way." "What is the matter with Ontario, Master Cap? It is large, and fair to look at, and pleasant enough to drink, for those who can't get at the water of the springs." "Do you call this large?" asked Cap, again sweeping the air with the pipe. "I will just ask you what there is large about it. Didn't Jasper himself confess that it was only some 20 leagues from shore to shore?"
"But, uncle," interposed Mabel, "no land is to be seen, except here on our own coast. To me it looks exactly like the ocean."
"This bit of pond look like the ocean! Well, Magnet, that from a girl who has had real seamen in her family is downright nonsense. What is there about it, pray, that has even the outline of a sea on it?"
Why, there is water, 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 nothing but water, from miles on miles, far as the eye can see." "And isn't there water, 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 nothing but water for miles on miles in your rivers, that you have been canoeing through too? Ay, and as far as the eye can see in the bargain?"
"Yes, uncle, but the rivers have their banks, and there are trees along them, and they are narrow."
"And isn't this a bank where we stand? Don't these soldiers call this the bank of the lake? And aren't there trees in thousands? And aren't 20 leagues narrow enough of all conscience? Who the devil ever heard of the banks of the ocean, unless it might be the banks that are under water?"
"But, uncle, we cannot see across this lake, as we can see across a river."
"There you are out, Magnet. Aren't the Amazon and Orinoco and La Plata rivers, and can you see across them? Hark you, Pathfinder, I very much doubt if this stripe of water here be even a lake, for to me it appears to be only a river. You are by no means particular about your geography, I find, up here in the woods." "There you are out, Master Cap. There is a river, and a noble one, too, at each end of it. But this is old Ontario before you, and, though it is not my gift to live on a lake, to my judgment there are few better than this."
"And, uncle, if we stood on the beach at Rockaway, what more should we see than we now behold? There is a shore on one side, or banks there, and trees too, as well as those which are here."
"This is perverseness, Magnet, and young girls should steer clear of anything like obstinacy. In the first place, the ocean has coasts, but no banks, except the Grand Banks, as I tell you, which are out of sight of land, and you will not pretend that this bank is out of sight of land, or even under water."
As Mabel could not very plausibly set up this extravagant opinion, Cap pursued the subject, his countenance beginning to discover the triumph of a successful disputant.
"And then them trees bear no comparison to these trees. The coasts of the ocean have farms and cities and country seats, and in some parts of the world castles and monasteries and lighthouses. Ay, lighthouses in particular, on them. Not one of all which things is to be seen here. No, Master Pathfinder, I have never heard of an ocean that hasn't more or less lighthouses on it, whereas hereaway there is not even a beacon. There is what is better, a forest and noble trees, a fit temple of God." "Ay, your forest may do for a lake, but of what use would an ocean be if the earth all around it were forest? Ships would be unnecessary, as timber might be floated in rafts, and there would be an end of trade, and what would a world be without trade? I am of that philosopher's opinion which says human nature was invented for the purposes of trade. Magnet, I am astonished that you should think this water even looks like sea water. Now, I dare say that there isn't such a thing as a whale in all your lake, Master Pathfinder." "I never heard of one, I will confess, but I am no judge of animals that live in the water, unless it be the fishes of the rivers and the brooks." "Nor a grampus, nor a porpoise even? Not so much as a poor devil of a shark?" "I will not take it on myself to say there is either. My gifts are not in that way, I tell you, Master Cap." "Nor herring, nor albatross, nor flying fish?" continued Cap, who kept his eye fastened on the guide, in order to see how far he might venture. "No such thing as a fish that can fly, I dare say." "A fish that can fly? Master Cap, do not think, because we are mere borderers, that we have no ideas of nature, and what she has been pleased to do. I know there are squirrels that can fly." "A squirrel fly? The devil, Master Pathfinder! Do you suppose that you have got a boy on his first voyage up here among you?" "I know nothing of your voyages, Master Cap, though I suppose them to have been many, for as for what belongs to nature in the woods, what I have seen I may tell, and not fear the face of man." And do you wish me to understand that you have seen a squirrel fly? If you wish to understand the power of God, Master Cap, you will do well to believe that, and many other things of a like nature, for you may be quite certain it is true.
And yet, Pathfinder, said Mabel, looking so prettily and sweetly, even while she played with the guide's infirmity, that he forgave her in his heart, you, who speak so reverently of the power of the deity, appear to doubt that a fish can fly.
I have not said it. I have not said it. And if Master Cap is ready to testify to the fact, unlikely as it seems, I am willing to try to think it true. I think it every man's duty to believe in the power of God, however difficult it may be. And why isn't my fish as likely to have wings as your squirrel? Demanded Cap, with more logic than was his wont. That fishes do and can fly is as true as it is reasonable. Nay, that is the only difficulty in believing the story, rejoined the guide. It seems unreasonable to give an animal that lives in the water wings, which seemingly can be of no use to it. And do you suppose that the fishes are such asses as to fly about under water, when they are once fairly fitted out with wings? Nay, I know nothing of the matter, but that fish should fly in the air seems more contrary to nature still, than that they should fly in their own element, that in which they were born and brought up, as one might say. So much for contracted ideas, Magnet. The fish fly out of water to run away from their enemies in the water, and there you see not only the fact but the reason for it. Then I suppose it must be true, said the guide quietly. How long are their flights? Not quite as far as those of pigeons, perhaps, but far enough to make an offing. As for those squirrels of yours, we'll say no more about them, friend Pathfinder, as I suppose they were mentioned just as a make-weight to the fish, in favor of the woods. But what is this thing anchored here under the hill?
That is the cutter of Jasper, uncle, said Mabel hurriedly, and a very pretty vessel I think it is. Its name, too, is the Scud.
Ay, it will do well enough for a lake, perhaps, but it's no great affair. The lad has got a standing bowsprit, and who ever saw a cutter with a standing bowsprit before?
But may there not be some good reason for it on a lake like this, uncle?
Sure enough. I must remember, this is not the ocean, though it does look so much like it.
Ah, uncle, then Ontario does look like the ocean, after all?
In your eyes, I mean, and those of Pathfinder, not in the least in mine, Magnet. Now you might set me down out yonder in the middle of this bit of a pond, and that too in the darkest night that ever fell from the heavens, and in the smallest canoe, and I could tell you it was only a lake. For that matter, the Dorothy, the name of his vessel, would find it out as quick as I could myself. I do not believe that brig would make more than a couple of short stretches at the most, before she would perceive the difference between Ontario and the old Atlantic. I once took her down into one of the large South American bays, and she behaved herself as awkwardly as a booby would in a church with the congregation in a hurry. And Jasper sails that boat? I must have a cruise with the lad, Magnet, before I quit you, just for the name of the thing. It would never do to say I got in sight of this pond and went away without taking a trip on it. Well, well, you needn't wait long for that, returned Pathfinder, for the sergeant is about to embark with a party to relieve a post among the Thousand Islands, and as I heard him say he intended that Mabel should go along, you can join the company too. Is this true, Magnet?
I believe it is, returned the girl, a flush so imperceptible as to escape the observation of her companions glowing on her cheeks, though I have had so little opportunity to talk with my dear father that I am not quite certain. Here he comes, however, and you can inquire of himself. Notwithstanding his humble rank, there was something in the mien and character of Sergeant Dunham that commanded respect.
of a tall, imposing figure, grave and saturnine disposition, and accurate and precise in his acts and manner of thinking, even Cap, dogmatical and supercilious as he usually was with landsmen, did not presume to take the same liberties with the old soldier as he did with his other friends. It was often remarked that Sergeant Dunham receives more true respect from Duncan of Lundy, the Scotch laird who commanded the post, than most of the subalterns, for experience and tried services were of quite as much value in the eyes of the veteran major as birth and money. While the sergeant never even hoped to rise any higher, he so far respected himself and his present station as always to act in a way to command attention, and the habit of mixing so much with inferiors, whose passions and dispositions he felt it necessary to restrain by distance and dignity, had so far colored his whole deportment that few were altogether free from its influence. While the captains treated him kindly and as an old comrade, the lieutenants seldom ventured to dissent from his military opinions, and the ensigns, it was remarked, actually manifested a species of respect that amounted to something very like deference. It is no wonder, then, that the announcement of Mabel put a sudden termination to the singular dialogue we have just related, though it had been often observed that the Pathfinder was the only man on that frontier, beneath the condition of a gentleman, who presumed to treat the sergeant at all as an equal, or even with the cordial familiarity of a friend. "Good morrow, brother Cap," said the sergeant, giving the military salute as he walked, in a grave stately manner, on the bastion. "My morning duty has made me seem forgetful of you and Mabel, but we have now an hour or two to spare, and to get acquainted. Do you not perceive, brother, a strong likeness on the girl to her we have so long lost?" "Mabel is the image of her mother, Sergeant, as I have always said, with a little of your firmer figure, though, for that matter, the Caps were never wanting in spring and activity." Mabel cast a timid glance at the stern, rigid countenance of her father, of whom she had ever thought, as the warm-hearted dwell on the affection of their absent parents, and, as she saw that the muscles of his face were working, notwithstanding the stiffness and method of his manner, her very heart yearned to throw herself on his bosom and to weep at will. But he was so much colder in externals, so much more formal and distant than she had expected to find him, that she would not have dared to hazard the freedom, even had they been alone. "You have taken a long and troublesome journey, brother, on my account, and we will try to make you comfortable while you stay among us." "I hear you are likely to receive orders to lift your anchor, Sergeant, and to shift your berth into a part of the world where they say there are 1,000 islands." "Pathfinder, this is some of your forgetfulness." "Nay, nay, Sergeant, I forgot nothing, but it did not seem to me necessary to hide your intentions so very closely from your own flesh and blood." "All military movements ought to be made with as little conversation as possible," returned the sergeant, tapping the guide soldier in a friendly but reproachful manner. "You have passed too much of your life in front of the French not to know the value of silence. But no matter, the thing must soon be known, and there is no great use in trying now to conceal it. We shall embark a relief party shortly for a post on the lake, though I do not say it is for the 1,000 islands, and I may have to go with it, in which case I intend to take Mabel to make my broth for me, and I hope, brother, you will not despise a soldier's fare for a month or so." "That will depend on the matter of marching. I have no love for woods and swamps." "We shall sail in the Scud, and indeed the whole service, which is no stranger to us, is likely enough to please one accustomed to the water." "Ay, to salt water if you will, but not to lake water. If you have no person to handle that bit of a cutter for you, I have no objection to ship for the voyage, notwithstanding, though I shall look on the whole affair as so much time thrown away, for I consider it an imposition to call sailing about this pond going to sea."
Jasper is every way able to manage the Scud, brother Cap, and in that light I cannot say that we have need of your services, though we shall be glad of your company. You cannot return to the settlement until a party is sent in, and that is not likely to happen until after my return. Well, Pathfinder, this is the first time I ever knew men on the trail of the Mingos, and you not at their head." "To be honest with you, Sergeant," returned the guide, not without a little awkwardness of manner, and a perceptible difference in the hue of a face that had become so uniformly red by exposure, "I have not felt that it was my gift this morning. In the first place, I very well know that the soldiers of the 55th are not the lads to overtake Iroquois in the woods, and the knaves did not wait to be surrounded when they knew that Jasper had reached the garrison. Then a man may take a little rest, after a summer of hard work, and no impeachment of his good will. Besides, the Sarpent is out with them, and if the miscreants are to be found at all, you may trust to his enmity and sight, the first being stronger, and the last nearly, if not quite as good as my own. He loves the skulking vagabonds as little as myself, and, for that matter, I may say that my own feelings towards a Mingo are not much more than the gifts of a Delaware grafted on a Christian stock. No, I thought I would leave the honor this time, if honor there is to be, to the young ensign that commands, who, if he don't lose his scalp, may boast of his campaign in his letters to his mother when he gets in. I thought I would play idler once in my life." "And no one has a better right, if long and faithful service entitles a man to a furlough," returned the sergeant kindly. "Mabel will not think the worse of you for preferring her company to the trail of the savages, and, I dare say, will be happy to give you a part of her breakfast if you are inclined to eat. You must not think, girl, however, that the Pathfinder is in the habit of letting prowlers around the fort beat a retreat without hearing the crack of his rifle." "If I thought she did, Sergeant, though not much given to showy and parade evolutions, I would shoulder Killdeer, and quit the garrison before her pretty eyes had time to frown. No, Mabel knows me better, though we are but new acquaintances, for there has been no want of Mingos to enliven the short march we have already made in company." "It would need a great deal of testimony, Pathfinder, to make me think ill of you in any way, and more than all in the way you mention," returned Mabel, coloring with a sincere earnestness, with which she endeavored to remove any suspicion to the contrary from his mind. "Both father and daughter, I believe, owe you their lives, and believe me, that neither will ever forget it." "Thank you, Mabel, thank you with all my heart. But I will not take advantage of your ignorance neither, girl, and therefore shall say, I do not think the Mingos would have hurt a hair of your head, had they succeeded by their deviltries and contrivances in getting you into their hands. My scalp, and Jasper's, and Master Cap's there, and the Sarpent's too, would certainly have been smoked, but as for the sergeant's daughter, I do not think they would have hurt a hair of her head." "And why should I suppose that enemies, known to spare neither women nor children, would have shown more mercy to me than to another? I feel, Pathfinder, that I owe you my life." "I say nay, Mabel, they wouldn't have had the heart to hurt you. No, not even a fiery Mingo devil would have had the heart to hurt a hair of your head. Bad as I suspected the vampires to be, I do not suspect them of anything so wicked as that. They might have wished you, nay, forced you to become the wife of one of their chiefs, and that would be torment enough to a Christian young woman, but beyond that I do not think even the Mingos themselves would have gone." "Well, then, I shall owe my escape from this great misfortune to you," said Mabel, taking his hard hand into her own frankly and cordially, and certainly in a way to delight the honest guide. "To me it would be a lighter evil to be killed than to become the wife of an Indian." "That is her gift, Sergeant," exclaimed Pathfinder, turning to his old comrade with gratification written on every lineament of his honest countenance, "and it will have its way. I tell the Sarpent that no Christianizing will ever make even a Delaware a white man, nor any whooping and yelling convert a paleface into a redskin. That is the gift of a young woman born of Christian parents, and it ought to be maintained." "You are right, Pathfinder, and so far as Mabel Dunham is concerned, it shall be maintained. But it is time to break your fasts, and if you will follow me, brother Cap, I will show you how we poor soldiers live here on a distant frontier." End of chapter.
Chapter 9 of the Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 9. Now, my co-mates and partners in exile, hath not old custom made this light more sweet than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court? Here feel we but the penalty of Adam. Taken from As You Like It. Sergeant Dunham made no empty vaunt when he gave the promise conveyed in the closing words of the last chapter. Notwithstanding the remote frontier position of the post, they who lived at it enjoyed a table that, in many respects, kings and princes might have envied. At the period of our tale, and indeed for half a century later, the whole of that vast region which has been called the West, or the new countries since the War of the Revolution, lay a comparatively unpeopled desert, teeming with all the living productions of nature that properly belong to the climate, man and the domestic animals excepted. The few Indians that roamed the forests then could produce no visible effects on the abundance of the game, and the scattered garrisons or occasional hunters that here and there were to be met with on that vast surface had no other influence than the bee on the buckwheat field, or the humming-bird on the flower. The marvels that have descended to our own times, in the way of tradition, concerning the quantities of beasts, birds, and fishes that were then to be met with, on the shores of the great lakes in particular, are known to be sustained by the experience of living men, else might we hesitate about relating them. But having been eye-witnesses of some of these prodigies, our office shall be discharged with the confidence that certainty can impart. Oswego was particularly well placed to keep the larder of an epicure amply supplied. Fish of various sorts abounded in its river, and the sportsman had only to cast his line to haul in a bass or some other member of the finny tribe, which then peopled the waters, as the air above the swamps of this fruitful latitude are known to be filled with insects. Among others was the salmon of the lakes, a variety of that well-known species that is scarcely inferior to the delicious salmon of northern Europe. Of the different migratory birds that frequent forests and waters, there was the same affluence, hundreds of acres of geese and ducks being often seen at a time in the great bays that indent the shores of the lake. Deer, bears, rabbits, and squirrels, with divers other quadrupeds, among which was sometimes included the elk or moose, helped to complete the sum of the natural supplies on which the post depended, more or less, to relieve the unavoidable privations of their remote frontier positions. In a place where viands that would elsewhere be deemed great luxuries were so abundant, no one was excluded from their enjoyment. The meanest individual at Oswego habitually feasted on game that would have formed the boast of a Parisian table, and it was no more than a healthy commentary on the caprices of taste and of the waywardness of human desires, that the very diet which in other scenes would have been deemed the subject of envy and repinings got to pall on the appetite. The coarse and regular food of the army, which it became necessary to husband on account of the difficulty of transportation,
rose in the estimation of the common soldier, and at any time he would cheerfully desert his venison and ducks and pigeons and salmon to banquet on the sweets of pickled pork, stringy turnips, and half-cooked cabbage. The table of Sergeant Dunham, as a matter of course, partook of the abundance and luxuries of the frontier, as well as of its privations. A delicious broiled salmon smoked on a homely platter, hot venison steaks sent up their appetizing odors, and several dishes of cold meats, all of which were composed of game, had been set before the guests, in honor of the newly arrived visitors, and in vindication of the old soldier's hospitality. "You do not seem to be on short allowance in this quarter of the world, Sergeant," said Cap, after he had got fairly initiated into the mysteries of the different dishes. "Your salmon might satisfy us Scotsmen."
"It fails to do it, notwithstanding, brother Cap, for among 200 or 300 of the fellows that we have in this garrison, there are not half a dozen who will not swear that the fish is unfit to be eaten. Even some of the lads, who never tasted venison except as poachers at home, turn up their noses at the fattest haunches that we get here."
"Ay, that is Christian nature," put in Pathfinder, "and I must say it is none to its credit. Now, a redskin never repines, but is always thankful for the food he gets, whether it be fat or lean, venison or bear, wild turkey's breast or wild goose's wing. To the shame of us white men be it said, that we look upon blessings without satisfaction, and consider trifling evils as matters of great account."
"It is so with the 55th, as I can answer, though I cannot say as much for their Christianity," returned the sergeant. "Even the major himself, old Duncan of Lundy, will sometimes swear that an oatmeal cake is better fare than the Oswego bass, and sigh for a swallow of Highland water, when, if so minded, he has the whole of Ontario to quench his thirst in."
"Has Major Duncan a wife and children?" asked Mabel, whose thoughts naturally turned towards her own sex in her new situation.
"Not he, girl, though they do say that he has a betrothed at home. The lady, it seems, is willing to wait, rather than to suffer the hardships of service in this wild region, all of which, brother Cap, is not according to my notions of a woman's duties. Your sister thought differently." "I hope, Sergeant, you do not think of Mabel for a soldier's wife," returned Cap gravely. "Our family has done its share in that way already, and it's high time that the sea was again remembered." "I do not think of finding a husband for the girl in the 55th, or any other regiment, I can promise you, brother, though I do think it getting to be time that the child were respectably married."
"Father!" "'Tis not their gift, Sergeant, to talk of these matters in so open a manner," said the guide, "for I've seen it verified by experience, that he who would follow the trail of a virgin's good will must not go shouting out his thoughts behind her. So, if you please, we will talk of something else."
"Well, then, brother Cap, I hope that bit of a cold roasted pig is to your mind. You seem to fancy the food."
"Ay, ay, give me civilized grub if I must eat," returned the pertinacious seaman. "Venison is well enough for your inland sailors, but we of the ocean like a little of that which we understand." Here Pathfinder laid down his knife and fork, and indulged in a hearty laugh, though in his always silent manner. Then he asked, with a little curiosity in his manner, "Don't you miss the skin, Master Cap? Don't you miss the skin?" "It would have been better for its jacket, I think myself, Pathfinder, but I suppose it is a fashion of the woods to serve up shoats in this style. Well, well, a man may go around the arth and not know everything. If you had had the skinning of that pig, Master Cap, it would have left you sore hands. The creature is a hedgehog." "Blast me, if I thought it wholesome natural pork either," returned Cap. "But then I believed even a pig might lose some of its good qualities up here away in the woods."
"If the skinning of it, brother, does not fall to my duty, Pathfinder, I hope you didn't find Mabel disobedient on the march." "Not she, not she. If Mabel is only half as well satisfied with Jasper and Pathfinder as the Pathfinder and Jasper are satisfied with her, Sergeant, we shall be friends for the remainder of our days." As the guide spoke, he turned his eyes toward the blushing girl, with a sort of innocent desire to know her opinion, and then, with an inborn delicacy, which proved he was far superior to the vulgar desire to invade the sanctity of feminine feeling, he looked at his plate, and seemed to regret his own boldness. "Well, well, we must remember that women are not men, my friend," resumed the sergeant, "and make proper allowance for nature and education. A recruit is not a veteran. Any man knows that it takes longer to make a good soldier than it takes to make anything else." "This is new doctrine, Sergeant," said Cap with some spirit. "We old seamen are apt to think that 6 soldiers, ay, and capital soldiers too, might be made while one sailor is getting his education." "Ay, brother Cap, I've seen something of the opinions which seafaring men have of themselves," returned the brother-in-law, with a smile as bland as comported with his saturnine features, "for I was many years one of the garrison in a seaport. You and I have conversed on the subject before, and I'm afraid we shall never agree. But if you wish to know what the difference is between a real soldier and man in what I should call a state of nature, you have only to look at a battalion of the 55th on parade this afternoon, and then, when you get back to York, examine one of the militia regiments making its greatest efforts." "Well, to my eye, Sergeant, there is very little difference, not more than you'll find between a brig and a snow. To me, they seem all alike, all scarlet and feathers and powder and pipeclay." "So much, sir, for the judgment of a sailor," returned the sergeant with dignity. "But perhaps you are not aware that it requires a year to teach a true soldier how to eat?" "So much the worse for him. The militia know how to eat at starting, for I have often heard that, on their marches, they commonly eat all before them, even if they do nothing else." "They have their gifts, I suppose, like other men," observed Pathfinder, with a view to preserve the peace, which was evidently in some danger of being broken by the obstinate predilection of each of the disputants in favor of his own calling. "And when a man has his gift from Providence, it is commonly idle to endeavor to bear up against it. The 55th, Sergeant, is a judicious regiment in the way of eating, as I know from having been so long in its company, though I dare say militia corps could be found that would outdo them in feats of that nature, too."
"Uncle," said Mabel, "if you have not breakfasted, I will thank you to go out upon the bastion with me again. We have neither of us half seen the lake, and it would be hardly seemly for a young woman to be walking about the fort, the first day of her arrival, quite alone." Cap understood the motive of Mabel, and having, at the bottom, a hearty friendship for his brother-in-law, he was willing enough to defer the argument until they had been longer together, for the idea of abandoning it altogether never crossed the mind of one so dogmatical and obstinate. He accordingly accompanied his niece, leaving Sergeant Dunham and his friend, the Pathfinder, alone together. As soon as his adversary had beat a retreat, the sergeant, who did not quite so well understand the maneuver of his daughter, turned to his companion, and with a smile which was not without triumph, he remarked, "The army, Pathfinder, has never done itself justice in the way of asserting its rights, and though modesty becomes a man, whether he is in a red coat or a black one, or, for that matter, in his shirt-sleeves, I don't like to let a good opportunity slip of saying a word in its behalf. Well, my friend," laying his own hand on one of the Pathfinders, and giving it a hearty squeeze, "how do you like the girl?" "You have reason to be proud of her, Sergeant. I have seen many of her sex, and some that were great and beautiful, but never before did I meet with one in whom I thought Providence had so well balanced the different gifts." "And the good opinion, I can tell you, Pathfinder, is mutual. She told me last night all about your coolness and spirit and kindness, particularly the last,
for kindness counts for more than half with females, my friend. And the first inspection seems to give satisfaction on both sides. Brush up the uniform, and pay a little more attention to the outside, Pathfinder, and you will have the girl heart in hand." Nay, Sergeant, I've forgotten nothing that you have told me, and grudge no reasonable gains to make myself as pleasant in the eyes of Mabel as she is getting to be in mine. I cleaned and brightened up Killdeer this morning as soon as the sun rose, and in my judgment the piece never looked better than it does at this very moment. "That is according to your hunting notions, Pathfinder, but firearms should sparkle and glitter in the sun, and I never yet could see any beauty in a clouded barrel." "Lord Howe thought otherwise, Sergeant, and he was accounted a good soldier." "Very true. His lordship had all the barrels of his regiment darkened, and what good came of it? You can see his scutcheon hanging in the English church at Albany. No, my worthy friend, a soldier should be a soldier, and at no time ought he to be ashamed or afraid to carry about him the signs and symbols of his honorable trade. Had you much discourse with Mabel, Pathfinder, as you came along in the canoe?" "There was not much opportunity, Sergeant, and then I found myself so much beneath her in ideas that I was afraid to speak of much beyond what belonged to my own gifts." "Therein you are partly right and partly wrong, my friend. Women love trifling discourse, though they like to have most of it to themselves. Now you know I'm a man that do not loosen my tongue at every giddy thought, and yet there were days when I could see that Mabel's mother thought none the worse of me because I descended a little from my manhood. It is true I was 22 years younger then than I am today, and, moreover, instead of being the oldest sergeant in the regiment, I was the youngest. Dignity is commanding and useful, and there is no getting on without it, as respects the men. But if you would be thoroughly esteemed by a woman, it is necessary to condescend a little on occasions." "Ah's me, Sergeant, I sometimes fear it will never do." "Why do you think so discouragingly of a matter in which I thought both our minds were made up?" "We did agree, if Mabel should prove what you told me she was, and if the girl could fancy a rude hunter and guide, that I should quit some of my wandering ways and try to humanize my mind down to a wife and children. But since I have seen the girl, I will own that many misgivings have come over me." "How's this?" interrupted the sergeant sternly. "Did I not understand you to say that you were pleased? And is Mabel a young woman to disappoint expectation?" "Ah, Sergeant, it is not Mabel that I distrust, but myself. I am but a poor ignorant woodsman, after all, and perhaps I'm not, in truth, as good as even you and I may think me." "If you doubt your own judgment of yourself, Pathfinder, I beg you will not doubt mine. Am I not accustomed to judge men's character? And am I often deceived? Ask Major Duncan, sir, if you desire any assurances on this particular." "But, Sergeant, we have long been friends, have fit side by side a dozen times, and have done each other many services. When this is the case, men are apt to think over kindly of each other, and I fear me that the daughter may not be so likely to view a plain ignorant hunter as favorably as the father does." "Tut, tut, Pathfinder, you don't know yourself, man, and may put all faith in my judgment. In the first place, you have experience, and, as all girls must want that, no prudent young woman would overlook such a qualification. Then you are not one of the coxcombs that strut about when they first join a regiment, but a man who has seen the service, and who carries the marks of it on his person and countenance. I dare say you have been under fire some 30 or 40 times, counting all the skirmishes and ambushes that you've seen." "All of that, Sergeant, all of that. But what will it avail in gaining the goodwill of a tender-hearted young female?" "It will gain the day. Experience in the field is as good in love as in war. but you are as honest-hearted and as loyal a subject as the king can boast of. God bless him!" "That may be too, but I'm afeard I'm too rude, and too old and too wild-like to suit the fancy of such a young and delicate girl as Mabel, who has been unused to our wilderness ways, and may think the settlements better suited to her gifts and inclinations." "These are new misgivings for you, my friend, and I wonder they were never paraded before." "Because I never knew my own worthlessness, perhaps, until I saw Mabel. I have travelled with some as fair, and have guided them through the forest, and seen them in their perils and in their gladness, but they were always too much above me to make me think of them as more than so many feeble ones I was bound to protect and defend. The case is now different. Mabel and I are so nearly alike, that I feel weighed down with a load that is hard to bear, at finding us so unlike. I do wish, Sergeant, that I was 10 years younger, more comely to look at, and better suited to please a handsome young woman's fancy." "Cheer up, my brave friend, and trust to a father's knowledge of womankind. Mabel half loves you already, and a fortnight's intercourse and kindness, down among the islands yonder, will close ranks with the other half. The girl as much as told me this herself last night." "Can this be so, Sergeant?" said the guide, whose meek and modest nature shrank from viewing himself in colours so favorable. "Can this be truly so? I am but a poor hunter, and Mabel, I see, is fit to be an officer's lady. Do you think the girl will consent to quit all her beloved settlement usages, and her visitings and church-goings, to dwell with a plain guide and hunter up here away in the woods? Will she not in the end crave her old ways and a better man?" "A better man, Pathfinder, would be hard to find," returned the father. "As for town usages, they are soon forgotten in the freedom of the forest, and Mabel has just spirit enough to dwell on a frontier. I've not planned this marriage, my friend, without thinking it over, as a general does his campaign. At first, I thought of bringing you into the regiment, that you might succeed me when I retire, which must be sooner or later, but on reflection, Pathfinder, I think you are scarcely fitted for the office. Still, if not a soldier in all the meanings of the word, you are a soldier in the best meaning, and I know that you have the goodwill of every officer in the corps. As long as I live, Mabel can dwell with me, and you will always have a home when you return from your scoutings and marches." "This is very pleasant to think of, Sergeant, if the girl can only come into our wishes with good will. But, ahs me, it does not seem that one like myself can ever be agreeable in her handsome eyes. If I were younger, and more comely now, as Jasper Western is, for instance, there might be a chance. Yes, then, indeed, there might be some chance." "That for Jasper Eau douce, and every younker of them in or about the fort," returned the sergeant, snapping his fingers. "If not actually a younger, you are a younger looking, ay, and a better looking man than the Scud's master." "Anan?" said Pathfinder, looking up at his companion with an expression of doubt, as if he did not understand his meaning. "I say, if not actually younger in days and years, you look more hardy and like whipcord than Jasper, or any of them, and there will be more of you 30 years hence than of all of them put together. A good conscience will keep one like you a mere boy all his life." "Jasper has as clear a conscience as any youth I know, Sergeant, and is as likely to wear on that account as any in the colony." "Then you are my friend," squeezing the other's hand, "my tried, sworn, and constant friend." "Yes, we have been friends, Sergeant, near 20 years before Mabel was born." "True enough, before Mabel was born. We were well-tried friends, and the hussy would never dream of refusing to marry a man who was her father's friend before she was born." "We don't know, Sergeant, we don't know. Like loves like. The young prefer the young for companions, and the old the old." "Not for wives, Pathfinder. I never knew an old man now who had an objection to a young wife. Then you are respected and esteemed by every officer in the fort, as I have said already, and it will please her fancy to like a man that every one else likes." "I hope I have no enemies but the Mingos," returned the guide, stroking down his hair meekly and speaking thoughtfully. "I've tried to do right, and that ought to make friends, though it sometimes fails." "And you may be said to keep the best company, for even old Duncan of Lundie is glad to see you, and you pass hours in his society. Of all the guides, he confides most in you." "Ay, even greater than he is, have marched by my side for days, and have conversed with me as if I were their brother. But, Sergeant, I have never been puffed up by their company, for I know that the woods often bring men to a level who would not be so in the settlements." "And you are known to be the greatest rifle shot that ever pulled trigger in all this region." "If Mabel could fancy a man for that, I might have no great reason to despair. And yet, Sergeant, I sometimes think that it is all as much owing to Killdeer as to any skill of my own. It is certainly a wonderful piece, and might do as much in the hands of another." "That is your own humble opinion of yourself, Pathfinder, but we have seen too many fail with the same weapon, and you succeed too often with the rifles of other men, to allow me to agree with you. We will get up a shooting match in a day or two, when you can show your skill, and when Mabel will form some judgment concerning your true character."
"Will that be fair, Sergeant? Everybody knows that Killdeer seldom misses, and ought we to make a trial of this sort when we all know what must be the result?"
"Tut, tut, man. I foresee I must do half this courting for you. For one who is always inside of the smoke in a skirmish, you are the faintest-hearted suitor I ever met with. Remember, Mabel comes of a bold stock, and the girl will be as likely to admire a man as her mother was before her."
Here the sergeant arose, and proceeded to attend to his never-ceasing duties, without apology, the terms on which the guide stood with all in the garrison rendering this freedom quite a matter of course. The reader will have gathered from the conversation just related one of the plans that Sergeant Dunham had in view in causing his daughter to be brought to the frontier. Although necessarily much weaned from the caresses and blandishments that had rendered his child so dear to him during the first year or two of his widowhood, he had still a strong but somewhat latent love for her. Accustomed to command and to obey, without being questioned himself or questioning others concerning the reasonableness of the mandates, he was perhaps too much disposed to believe that his daughter would marry the man he might select, while he was far from being disposed to do violence to her wishes. The fact was, few knew the Pathfinder intimately without secretly believing him to be one of extraordinary qualities. Ever the same, simple-minded, faithful, utterly without fear, and yet prudent, foremost in all warrantable enterprises, or what the opinion of the day considered as such, and never engaged in anything to call a blush to his cheek or censure on his acts, it was not possible to live much with this being and not feel respect and admiration for him, which had no reference to his position in life. The most surprising peculiarity about the man himself was the entire indifference with which he regarded all distinctions which did not depend on personal merit. He was respectful to his superiors from habit, but had often been known to correct their mistakes and to reprove their vices with a fearlessness that proved how essentially he regarded the more material points, and with a natural discrimination that appeared to set education at defiance. In short, a disbeliever in the ability of man to distinguish between good and evil without the aid of instruction would have been staggered by the character of this extraordinary inhabitant of the frontier. His feelings appeared to possess the freshness and nature of the forest in which he passed so much of his time, and no casuist would have made clearer decisions in matters relating to right and wrong, and yet he was not without his prejudices, which, though few, and colored by the character and usages of the individual, were deep-rooted,
and almost formed a part of his nature. But the most striking feature about the moral organization of Pathfinder was his beautiful and unerring sense of justice. This noble trait, and without it no man can be truly great, with it no man other than respectable, probably had its unseen influence on all who associated with him, for the common and unprincipled brawler of the camp had been known to return from an expedition made in his company, rebuked by his sentiments, softened by his language, and improved by his example. As might have been expected, with so elevated a quality his fidelity was like the immovable rock. Treachery in him was classed among the things which are impossible, and as he seldom retired before his enemies, so was he never known, under any circumstances that admitted of an alternative, to abandon a friend. The affinities of such a character were, as a matter of course, those of like for like. His associates and intimates, though more or less determined by chance, were generally of the highest order as to moral propensities, for he appeared to possess a species of instinctive discrimination, which led him, insensibly to himself, most probably, to cling closest to those whose characters would best reward his friendship. In short, it was said of the Pathfinder, by one accustomed to study his fellows, that he was a fair example of what a just-minded and pure man might be, while untempted by unruly or ambitious desires, and left to follow the bias of his feelings, amid the solitary grandeur and ennobling influences of a sublime nature, neither led aside by the inducements which influence all to do evil, amid the incentives of civilization, nor forgetful of the Almighty Being whose spirit pervades the wilderness as well as the towns. Such was the man whom Sergeant Dunham had selected as the husband of Mabel. In making this choice, he had not been as much governed by a clear and judicious view of the merits of the individual, perhaps, as by his own likings. Still no one knew the Pathfinder so intimately as himself, without always conceding to the honest guide a high place in his esteem on account of those very virtues. That his daughter could find any serious objections to the match the old soldier did not apprehend, while, on the other hand, he saw many advantages to himself in dim perspective, connected with the decline of his days, and an evening of life passed among descendants who were equally dear to him through both parents. He had first made the proposition to his friend, who had listened to it kindly, but who, the Sergeant was now pleased to find, already betrayed a willingness to come into his own views that was proportioned to the doubts and misgivings proceeding from his humble distrust of himself. End of chapter. Chapter 10 of the Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder, by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 10. Think not I love him, though I ask for him. 'Tis but a peevish boy, yet he talks well. But what care I for words? Unattributed. A week passed in the usual routine of a garrison. Mabel was becoming used to a situation that, at first, she had found not only novel, but a little irksome, and the officers and men in their turn, gradually familiarized to the presence of a young and blooming girl, whose attire and carriage had that air of modest gentility about them which she had obtained in the family of her patroness, annoyed her less by their ill-concealed admiration, while they gratified her by the respect which, she was fain to think, they paid her on account of her father, but which in truth was more to be attributed to her own modest but spirited deportment than to any deference to the worthy sergeant. Acquaintances made in a forest, or in any circumstances of unusual excitement, soon attain their limits. Mabel found 1 week's residence at Oswego sufficient to determine her as to those with whom she might be intimate and those whom she ought to avoid. The sort of neutral position occupied by her father, who was not an officer, while he was so much more than a common soldier, by keeping her aloof from the two great classes of military life, lessened the number of those whom she was compelled to know, and made the duty of decision comparatively easy. Still, she soon discovered that there were a few, even among those that could aspire to a seat at the commandant's table, who were disposed to overlook the halbert for the novelty of a well-turned figure and of a pretty, winning face, and by the end of the first 2 or 3 days she had admirers even among the gentlemen. The quartermaster, in particular, a middle-aged soldier, who had more than once tried the blessings of matrimony already, but was now a widower, was evidently disposed to increase his intimacy with the sergeant, though his duties often brought them together, and the youngsters among his messmates did not fail to note that this man of method, who was a Scotsman of the name of Muir, was much more frequent in his visits to the quarters of his subordinate than had formerly been his wont. A laugh or a joke, in honor of the sergeant's daughter, however, limited their strictures, though Mabel Dunham was soon a toast that even the ensign or the lieutenant did not disdain to give. At the end of the week, Duncan of Lundy sent for Sergeant Dunham, after evening roll call, on business of a nature that, it was understood, required a personal conference. The old veteran dwelt in a movable hut, which, being placed on trucks, he could order to be wheeled about at pleasure, sometimes living in one part of the area within the fort, and sometimes in another. On the present occasion he had made a halt near the center, and there he was found by his subordinate, who was admitted to his presence without any delay or dancing attendance in an antechamber. In point of fact, there was very little difference in the quality of the accommodations allowed to the officers and those allowed to the men, the former being merely granted the most room. "Walk in, Sergeant, walk in, my good friend," said old Lundy heartily, as his inferior stood in a respectful attitude at the door of a sort of library and bedroom into which he had been ushered. "Walk in and take a seat on that stool. I have sent for you, man, to discuss anything but rosters and payrolls this evening. It is now many years since we have been comrades, and auld lang syne should count for something, even between a major and his orderly, a Scot and a Yankee. Sit you down, man, and just put yourself at your ease. It has been a fine day, Sergeant." "It has indeed, Major Duncan," returned the other, who, though he complied so far as to take the seat, was much too practised not to understand the degree of respect it was necessary to maintain in his manner. "A very fine day, sir, it has been, and we may look for more of them at this season." "I hope so with all my heart. The crops look well as it is, man, and you'll be finding that the 55th make almost as good farmers as soldiers. I never saw better potatoes in Scotland than we are likely to have in that new patch of ours." "They promise a good yield, Major Duncan, and, in that light, a more comfortable winter than the last." "Life is progressive, Sergeant, in its comforts as well as its need of them. We grow old, and I begin to think it time to retire and settle in life. I feel that my working days are nearly over." "The king, God bless him, sir, has much good service in your honor yet." "It may be so, Sergeant Dunham, especially if it should happen to have a spare lieutenant colonelcy left." "The 55th will be honored the day that commission is given to Duncan of Lundy, sir." "And Duncan of Lundy will be honored the day he receives it. But, Sergeant, if you have never had a lieutenant colonelcy, you have had a good wife, and that is the next thing to rank in making a man happy." "I have been married, Major Duncan, but it is now a long time since I have had no drawback on the love I bear his Majesty and my duty." "What, man? Not even the love you bear that active little round-limbed, rosy-cheeked daughter that I have seen in the fort these last few days? Out upon you, Sergeant! Old fellow as I am, I could almost love that little lassie myself, and send the lieutenant colonelcy to the devil." We all know where Major Duncan's heart is, and that is in Scotland, where a beautiful lady is ready and willing to make him happy as soon as his own sense of duty shall permit." "Ay, hope is ever a far-off thing, Sergeant," returned the superior, a shade of melancholy passing over his hard Scottish features as he spoke. "And bonnie Scotland is a far-off country. Well, if we have no heather and oatmeal in this region, we have venison for the killing of it, and salmon as plenty as in Berwick upon Tweed. Is it true, Sergeant, that the men complain of having been over-venisoned and over-pigeoned of late?" "Not for some weeks, Major Duncan, for neither deer nor birds are so plenty at this season as they have been. They begin to throw their remarks about concerning the salmon, but I trust we shall get through the summer without any serious disturbance on the score of food. The Scotch in the battalion do, indeed, talk more than is prudent of their want of oatmeal, grumbling occasionally of our wheaten bread." "Ah, that is human nature, Sergeant, pure, unadulterated Scotch human nature. A cake, man, to say the truth, is an agreeable morsel, and I often see the time when I pine for a bite myself." "If the feeling gets to be troublesome, Major Duncan, in the men, I mean, sir, for I would not think of saying so disrespectful a thing to your honor, but if the men ever pine seriously for their natural food, I would humbly recommend that some oatmeal be imported, or prepared in this country for them, and I think we shall hear no more of it. A very little would answer for a cure, sir." "Ha, ha, ha! You are a wag, Sergeant, but hang me if I'm sure you are not right. There may be sweeter things in this world, after all, than oatmeal. You have a sweet daughter, Dunham, for one." "The girl is like her mother, Major Duncan, and will pass inspection," said the sergeant proudly. "Neither was brought up on anything better than good American flour. The girl will pass inspection, sir." "That would she, I'll answer for it. Well, I may as well come to the point at once, man, and bring up my reserve into the front of the battle. Here is Davy Muir, the quartermaster, disposed to make your daughter his wife, and he has just got me to open the matter to you, being fearful of compromising his own dignity, and I may as well add that half the youngsters in the fort toast her, and talk of her from morning till night." "She is much honored, sir," returned the father stiffly, "but I trust the gentlemen will find something more worthy of them to talk about ere long. I hope to see her the wife of an honest man before many weeks, sir." "Yes, Davy is an honest man, and that is more than can be said for all in the quartermaster's department, I'm thinking, Sergeant," returned Lundy, with a slight smile. "Well, then may I tell the Cupid-stricken youth that the matter is as good as settled?" "I thank your honor, but Mabel is betrothed to another." "The devil she is! That will produce a stir in the fort, though I'm not sorry to hear it either, for, to be frank with you, Sergeant, I'm no great admirer of unequal matches." "I think with your honor, and have no desire to see my daughter an officer's lady. If she can get as high as her mother was before her, it ought to satisfy any reasonable woman." "And may I ask, Sergeant, who is the lucky man that you intend to call son-in-law?" "The Pathfinder, your honor." "Pathfinder!" "The same, Major Duncan, and in naming him to you, I give you his whole history. No one is better known on this frontier than my honest, brave, true-hearted friend." "Ah, all that is true enough, but is he, after all, the sort of person to make a girl of 20 happy?" "Why not, your honor? The man is at the head of his calling. There is no other guide or scout connected with the army who has half the reputation of Pathfinder, or who deserves to have it half as well." "Very true, Sergeant. But is the reputation of a scout exactly the sort of renown to captivate a girl's fancy?" "Talking of girls' fancies, sir, is, in my humble opinion, much like talking of a recruit's judgment. If we were to take the movements of the awkward squad, sir, as a guide, we should never form a decent line in battalion, Major Duncan." "But your daughter has nothing awkward about her, for a genteeler girl of her class could not be found in old Albion itself. Is she of your way of thinking in this matter?"
though I suppose she must be, as you say she is betrothed."
"We have not yet conversed on the subject, your honor, but I consider her mind as good as made up, from several little circumstances which might be named."
"And what are those circumstances, Sergeant?" asked the Major, who began to take more interest than he had at first felt on the subject. "I confess a little curiosity to know something about a woman's mind, being, as you know, a bachelor myself."
"Why, your honor, when I speak of the Pathfinder to the girl, she always looks me full in the face, chimes in with everything I say in his favor, and has a frank, open way with her, which says as much as if she half considered him already as a husband."
"And these signs, you think, Dunham, are faithful tokens of your daughter's feelings?"
"I do, your honor, for they strike me as natural. When I find a man, sir, who looks me full in the face, while he praises an officer, for, begging your honor's pardon, the men will sometimes pass their strictures on their betters, and when I find a man looking me in the eyes as he praises his captain, I always set it down that the fellow is honest and means what he says."
"Is there not some material difference in the age of the intended bridegroom and that of his pretty bride, Sergeant?"
"You are quite right, sir. Pathfinder is well advanced towards 40, and Mabel has every prospect of happiness that a young woman can derive from the certainty of possessing an experienced husband. I was quite 40 myself, your honor, when I married her mother."
"But will your daughter be as likely to admire a green hunting shirt, such as that our worthy guide wears, with a foxskin cap, as the smart uniform of the 55th?
"Perhaps not, sir, and therefore she will have the merit of self-denial, which always makes a young woman wiser and better."
"And are you not afraid that she may be left a widow while still a young woman? What between wild beasts and wilder savages, Pathfinder may be said to carry his life in his hand."
"Every bullet has its billet, Lundy," for so the Major was fond of being called in his moments of condescension, and when not engaged in military affairs, "and no man in the 55th can call himself beyond or above the chances of sudden death. In that particular, Mabel would gain nothing by a change. Besides, sir, if I may speak freely on such a subject, I much doubt if ever Pathfinder dies in battle, or by any of the sudden chances of the wilderness."
"And why so, Sergeant?" asked the Major. "He is a soldier, so far as danger is concerned, and one that is much more than usually exposed; and, being free of his person, why should he expect to escape when others do not?"
"I do not believe, your honor, that the Pathfinder considers his own chances better than any one's else, but the man will never die by a bullet. I have seen him so often handling his rifle with as much composure as if it were a shepherd's crook in the midst of the heaviest showers of bullets, and under so many extraordinary circumstances, that I do not think Providence means he should ever fall in that manner. And yet, if there be a man in his Majesty's dominions who really deserves such a death, it is Pathfinder."
"We never know, Sergeant," returned Lundy, with a countenance grave with thought, "and the less we say about it, perhaps, the better. But will your daughter, Mabel I think you call her, will Mabel be as willing to accept one who, after all, is a mere hanger-on of the army, as to take one from the service itself? There is no hope of promotion for the guide, Sergeant."
"He is at the head of his corps already, your honor. In short, Mabel has made up her mind on this subject, and, as your honor has had the condescension to speak to me about Mr. Muir, I trust you will be kind enough to say that the girl is as good as billeted for life."
Well, this is your own matter, and now, Sergeant Dunham."
"Your honor," said the other, rising and giving the customary salute.
"You have been told it is my intention to send you down among the Thousand Islands for the next month. All the old subalterns have had their tours of duty in that quarter, all that I like to trust at least, and it has at length come to your turn. Lieutenant Muir, it is true, claims his right, but being quartermaster, I do not like to break up well-established arrangements. Are the men drafted?"
Everything is ready, your honor. The draft is made, and I understood that the canoe which got in last night brought a message to say that the party already below is looking out for the relief. It did, and you may sail the day after tomorrow, if not tomorrow night. It will be wise, perhaps, to sail in the dark. So Jasper thinks, Major Duncan, and I know no one more to be depended on in such an affair than young Jasper Western. Young Jasper Eau Douce, said Lundy, a slight smile gathering around his usually stern mouth. Will that lad be of your party, Sergeant? Your honor will remember that the Scud never quits port without him. True, but all general rules have their exceptions. Have I not seen a seafaring person about the fort within the last few days? No doubt, your honor. It is Master Cap, a brother-in-law of mine, who brought my daughter from below. Why not put him in the Scud for this cruise, Sergeant, and leave Jasper behind? Your brother-in-law would like the variety of a freshwater cruise, and you would enjoy more of his company. I intended to ask your honor's permission to take him along, but he must go as a volunteer. Jasper is too brave a lad to be turned out of his command without a reason, Major Duncan, and I'm afraid Brother Cap despises fresh water too much to do duty on it. Quite right, Sergeant, and I leave all this to your own discretion. Eau Douce must retain his command, on second thoughts. You intend that Pathfinder shall also be of the party? If your honor approves of it. There will be service for both the guides, the Indian as well as the white man. I think you are right. Well, Sergeant, I wish you luck in the enterprise, and remember the post is to be destroyed and abandoned when your command is withdrawn. It will have done its work by that time, or we shall have failed entirely, and it is too ticklish a position to be maintained unnecessarily. You can retire. Sergeant Dunham gave the customary salute, turned on his heels as if they had been pivots, and had got the door nearly drawn to after him when he was suddenly recalled. I had forgotten, Sergeant. The younger officers have begged for a shooting match, and tomorrow has been named for the day. All competitors will be admitted, and the prizes will be a silver-mounted powder horn, a leathern flask ditto, reading from a piece of paper, as I see by the professional jargon of this bill, and a silk calash for a lady. The latter is to enable the victor to show his gallantry by making an offering of it to her he best loves. All very agreeable, your honor, at least to him that succeeds. Is the Pathfinder to be permitted to enter? I do not well see how he can be excluded, if he choose to come forward. Latterly, I have observed that he takes no share in these sports, probably from a conviction of his own unequalled skill. That's it, Major Duncan. The honest fellow knows there is not a man on the frontier who can equal him, and he does not wish to spoil the pleasure of others. I think we may trust to his delicacy in anything, sir. Perhaps it may be as well to let him have his own way? In this instance we must, Sergeant. Whether he will be as successful in all others remains to be seen. I wish you good evening, Dunham. The sergeant now withdrew, leaving Duncan of Lundy to his own thoughts. That they were not altogether disagreeable was to be inferred from the smiles which occasionally covered a countenance hard and martial in its usual expression, though there were moments in which all its severe sobriety prevailed. Half an hour might have passed, when a tap at the door was answered by a direction to enter. A middle-aged man, in the dress of an officer, but whose uniform wanted the usual smartness of the profession, made his appearance, and was saluted as Mr. Muir. "I have come at your bidding to know my fortune," said the quartermaster in a strong Scotch accent, as soon as he had taken the seat which was proffered to him. "To say the truth to you, Major Duncan, this girl is making as much havoc in the garrison as the French did before Ty. I never witnessed so general a rout in so short a time." "Surely, Davy, you don't mean to persuade me that your young and unsophisticated heart is in such a flame after 1 week's ignition? Why, man, this is worse than the affair in Scotland, where it was said the heat within was so intense that it just burnt a hole through your own precious body and left a place for all the lassies to peer in at, to see what the combustible material was worth.
You'll have your own way, Major Duncan, and your father and mother would have theirs before you, even if the enemy were in the camp. I see nothing so extraordinary in young people following the bent of their inclinations and wishes. But you've followed yours so often, Davy, that I should think by this time it had lost the edge of novelty. Including that informal affair in Scotland, when you were a lad, you've been married 4 times already. Only 3, Major, as I hope to get another wife. I've not yet had my number. No, only 3. I'm thinking, Davy, you don't include the first affair I mentioned, that in which there was no parson. And why should I, Major? The courts decided it was no marriage, and what more could a man want? The woman took advantage of a slight amorous propensity that may be a weakness in my disposition, perhaps, and inveigled me into a contract which was found to be illegal. If I remember right, Muir, there were thought to be 2 sides to that question in the time of it. It would be but an indifferent question, my dear Major, that hadn't 2 sides to it, and I've known many that had 3. But the poor woman's dead, and there was no issue, so nothing came of it after all. Then I was particularly unfortunate with my second wife. I say second, Major, out of deference to you, and on the mere supposition that the first was a marriage at all. But first or second, I was particularly unfortunate with Jeannie Graham, who died in the first lustrum, leaving neither chick nor chiel behind her. I do think if Jeannie had survived, I never should have had turned my thoughts towards another wife. But as she did not, you married twice after her death, and are desirous of doing so a 3rd time. The truth can never justly be gainsaid, Major Duncan, and I am always ready to avow it. I'm thinking, Lundy, you are melancholy this fine evening? No, Muir, not melancholy absolutely, but a little thoughtful, I confess. I was looking back to my own boyish days, when I, the laird's son, and you, the parson's, roamed about our native hills, happy and careless boys, taking little heed to the future, and then have followed some thoughts that may be a little painful concerning that future as it has turned out to be. Surely, Lundy, you do not complain of your portion of it. You've risen to be a major, and will soon be a lieutenant colonel, if letters tell the truth, while I am just 1 step higher than when your honoured father gave me my first commission, and a poor devil of a quartermaster. And the 4 wives? 3, Lundy. 3 only that were legal, even under our own liberal and sanctified laws. Well, then, let it be 3. You know, Davy, said Major Duncan, insensibly dropping into the pronunciation and dialect of his youth, as is much the practice with educated Scotchmen as they warm with a subject that comes near the heart. You know, Davy, that my own choice has long been made, and in how anxious and hope-wearied a manner I've waited for that happy hour when I can call the woman I've so long loved a wife. And here have you, without fortune, name, birth, or merit, I mean particular merit. Na, dinna say that, Lundy. The Muirs are good blood. Well, then, without aught but blood, you've wied 4 times. I tell ye it's but thrice, Lundy. You'll weaken old friendship if you call it 4. Put it at your own number, Davy, and it's far more than your share. Our lives have been very different, on the score of matrimony at least. You must allow that, my old friend. In which do you think has been the gainer, Major, speaking as frankly together as we did when lads? Nay, I've nothing to conceal. My days have passed in hope deferred, while yours have passed in— Not in hope realized, I give you mine honour, Major Duncan, interrupted the quartermaster. Each new experiment I have thought might prove an advantage, but disappointment seems the lot of man. Ah, this is a vain world of ours, Lundy, it must be owned, and in nothing vainer than in matrimony. And yet you are ready to put your neck into the noose for the 5th time? I desire to say it will be but the 4th, Major Duncan, said the quartermaster positively. Then, instantly changing the expression of his face to one of boyish rapture, he added, "But this Mabel Dunham is a rara avis. Our Scotch lassies are fair and pleasant, but it must be owned these colonials are of surpassing comeliness. You will do well to recollect your commission in blood, Davy. I believe all 4 of your wives. I wish, my dear Lundy, that you be more accurate in your arithmetic. 3 times 1 make 3. All 3, then, were what might be termed gentlewomen? That's just it, Major. 3 were gentlewomen, as you say, and the connections were suitable. And the 4th being the daughter of my father's gardener, the connection was unsuitable. But have you no fear that marrying the child of a non-commissioned officer, who is in the same corps with yourself, will have the effect to lessen your consequence in the regiment? That's just been my weakness through life, Major Duncan, for I've always married without regard to consequences. Every man has his besetting sin, and matrimony, I fear, is mine. And now that we have discussed what may be called the principles of the connection, I will just ask if you did me the favour to speak to the sergeant on the trifling affair. I did, David, and am sorry to say, for your hopes, that I see no great chance of your succeeding. Not succeeding! An officer and a quartermaster in the bargain, and not succeed with the sergeant's daughter? It's just that, Davy. And why not, Lundy? Will you have the goodness to answer just that? The girl is betrothed, hand plighted, word passed, love pledged. No, hang me if I believe that either, but she is betrothed. Well, that's an obstacle, it must be avowed, Major, though it counts for little if the heart is free. Quite true, and I think it probable the heart is free in this case, for the intended husband appears to be the choice of the father rather than of the daughter. And who may it be, Major? Asked the quartermaster, who viewed the whole matter with the philosophy and coolness acquired by use. I do not recollect any plausible suitor that is likely to stand in my way. No, you are the only plausible suitor on the frontier, Davy. The happy man is Pathfinder. Pathfinder, Major Duncan! No more, nor any less, David Muir. Pathfinder is the man, but it may relieve your jealousy a little to know that, in my judgment at least, it is a match of the father's rather than of the daughter's seeking. I thought as much, exclaimed the quartermaster, drawing a long breath, like one who felt relieved. It's quite impossible that with my experience in human nature, particularly who woman's nature, David? You will have your joke, Lundy. Let who will suffer. But I did not think it possible I could be deceived as to the young woman's inclinations, which I think I may boldly pronounce to be altogether above the condition of Pathfinder. As for the individual himself, why, time will show. Now tell me frankly, Davy Muir, said Lundy, stepping short in his walk and looking the other earnestly in the face with a comical expression of surprise that rendered the veteran's countenance ridiculously earnest. Do you really suppose a girl like the daughter of Sergeant Dunham can take a serious fancy to a man of your years and appearance, and experience, I might add? Hoot awa, Lundy, you dinna know the Sacs, and that's the reason you're unmarried in your 45th year. It's a fearful time you've been a bachelor, Major. And what may be your age, Lieutenant Muir, if I may presume to ask so delicate a question? 47, I no deny it, Lundy, and if I get Mabel, there'll be just a wife for every twa lustrums. But I dinna think Sergeant Dunham would be so humble-minded as to dream of giving that sweet lass of his to one like the Pathfinder. There's no dream about it, Davy. The man is as serious as a soldier about to be flogged. Well, well, Major, we are old friends. Both ran into the Scotch, or avoided it, as they approached or drew away from their younger days in the dialogue, and ought to know how to take and give a joke off duty. It is possible the worthy man has not understood my hints, or he never would have thought of such a thing. The difference between an officer's consort and a guide's woman is as vast as that between the antiquity of Scotland and the antiquity of America. I'm old blood too, Lundy. Take my word for it, Davy. Your antiquity would do you no good in this affair. And as for your blood,
it is not older than your bones. Well, well, man, you know the Sergeant's answer, and so you perceive that my influence, on which you counted so much, can do naught for you. Let us take a glass together, Davy, for auld acquaintance sake, and then you'll be doing well to remember the party that marches the morrow, and to forget Mabel Dunham as fast as ever you can." "Ah, Major, I have always found it easier to forget a wife than to forget a sweetheart. When a couple are fairly married, all is settled but the death, as one may say, which must finally part us all, and it seems to me awfully irreverent to disturb the departed, whereas there is no much anxiety and hope and felicity and expectation like, with the lassie, that it keeps thought alive." "That is just my idea of your situation, Davy, for I never supposed you'd expected any more felicity with either of your wives. Now, I've heard of fellows who were so stupid as to look forward to happiness with their wives, even beyond the grave. I drink to your success, or to your speedy recovery from this attack, Lieutenant, and I admonish you to be more cautious in future, as some of these violent cases may yet carry you off." "Many thanks, dear Major, and a speedy termination to an old courtship, of which I know something. This is real mountain dew, Lundy, and it warms the heart like a gleam of bonny Scotland. As for the men you've just mentioned, they could have had but one wife apiece, for where there are several, the deeds of the women themselves may carry them different ways. I think a reasonable husband ought to be satisfied with passing his allotted time with any particular wife in this world, and not to go about moping for things unattainable. I'm infinitely obliged to you, Major Duncan, for this and all your other acts of friendship, and if you could but add another, I should think you had not altogether forgotten the playfellow of your boyhood." "Well, Davy, if the request be reasonable, and such as a superior ought to grant, out with it, man." "If you could only contrive a little service for me, down among the Thousand Isles, for a fortnight or so, I think this matter might be settled to the satisfaction of all parties. Just remember, Lundy, the lassie is the only marriageable white female on this frontier." "There is always duty for one in your line at a post, however small, but this below can be done by the sergeant as well as by the quartermaster-general, and better too." "But not better than by a regimental officer. There is great waste in common among the orderlies." "I'll think of it, Muir," said the Major, laughing, "and you shall have my answer in the morning. Here will be a fine occasion, man, the morrow, to show yourself off before the lady. You are our expert with a rifle, and prizes are to be won. Make up your mind to display your skill, and who knows what may yet happen before the Scud sails." "I'm thinking most of the young men will try their hands in this sport, Major." "That they will, and some of the old ones too, if you appear. To keep you in countenance, I'll try a shot or two myself, Davy, and you know I have some name that way." "It might indeed do good. The female heart, Major Duncan, is susceptible in many different modes, and sometimes in a way that the rules of philosophy might reject. Some require a suitor to sit down before them, as it might be, in a regular siege, and only capitulate when the place can hold out no longer. Others, again, like to be carried by storm, while there are hussies who can only be caught by leading them into an ambush. The first is the most creditable and officer-like process, perhaps, but I must say I think the last the most pleasing." "An opinion formed from experience, out of all question. And what of the storming parties?" "They may do for our younger men, Lundy," returned the quartermaster, rising and winking, a liberty that he often took with the commanding officer on the score of a long intimacy. "Every period of life has its necessities, and at 47 it's just as well to trust a little to the head. I wish you a very good even, Major Duncan, and freedom from gout, with a sweet and refreshing sleep." "The same to yourself, Mr. Muir, with many thanks. Remember the passage of arms for the morrow." The quartermaster withdrew, leaving Lundy in his library to reflect on what had just passed. Use had so accustomed Major Duncan to Lieutenant Muir and all his traits and humors,
that the conduct of the latter did not strike the former with the same force as it will probably the reader. In truth, while all men act under one common law that is termed nature, the varieties in their dispositions, modes of judging, feelings, and selfishness are infinite. End of chapter.
Chapter 11 of the Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 11. Compel the hawk to sit that is unmanned, or make the hound untaught to draw the deer, or bring the free against his will in band, or move the sad a pleasant tale to hear. Your time is lost, and you no whit the near. So love ne'er learns, of force the heart to knit, she serves but those that feel sweet fancies fit. From Mirror for Magistrates. It is not often that hope is rewarded by fruition so completely as the wishes of the young men of the garrison were met by the state of the weather on the succeeding day. The heats of summer were little felt at Oswego at the period of which we are writing, for the shade of the forest, added to the refreshing breezes from the lake, so far reduced the influence of the sun as to render the nights always cool and the days seldom oppressive. It was now September, a month in which the strong gales of the coast often appear to force themselves across the country as far as the Great Lakes, where the inland sailor sometimes feels that genial influence which characterizes the winds of the ocean, invigorating its frame, cheering his spirits, and arousing his moral force. Such a day was that on which the garrison of Oswego assembled to witness what its commander had jocularly called a passage of arms. Lundy was a scholar in military matters at least, and it was one of his sources of honest pride to direct the reading and thoughts of the young men under his orders to the more intellectual parts of their profession. For one in his situation, his library was both good and extensive, and its books were freely lent to all who desired to use them. Among other whims that had found their way into the garrison through these means, was a relish for the sort of amusement in which it was now about to indulge, and around which some chronicles of the days of chivalry had induced them to throw a parade and romance not unsuited to the characters and habits of soldiers, or to the insulated and wild post occupied by this particular garrison. While so earnestly bent on pleasure, however, they on whom that duty devolved did not neglect the safety of the garrison. One standing on the ramparts of the fort, and gazing on the waste of glittering water that bounded the view all along the northern horizon, and on the slumbering and seemingly boundless forest which filled the other half of the panorama, would have fancied the spot the very abode of peacefulness and security, but Duncan of Lundy too well knew that the woods might, at any moment, give up their hundreds, bent on the destruction of the fort and all it contained, and that even the treacherous lake offered a highway of easy approach by which his more civilized and scarcely less wily foes, the French, could come upon him at an unguarded moment. Parties were sent out under old and vigilant officers, men who cared little for the sports of the day, to scour the forest, and one entire company held the fort under arms, with orders to maintain a vigilance as strict as if an enemy of superior force was known to be near. With these precautions, the remainder of the officers and men abandoned themselves without apprehension to the business of the morning. The spot selected for the sports was a sort of esplanade, a little west of the fort, and on the immediate bank of the lake. It had been cleared of its trees and stumps, that it might answer the purpose of a parade ground, as it possessed the advantages of having its rear protected by the water, and one of its flanks by the works. Men drilling on it could be attacked, consequently, on two sides only, and as the cleared space beyond it,
in the direction of the west and south was large, any assailants would be compelled to quit the cover of the woods before they could make an approach sufficiently near to render them dangerous. Although the regular arms of the regiment were muskets, some 50 rifles were produced on the present occasion. Every officer had one as a part of his private provision for amusement. Many belonged to the scouts and friendly Indians, of whom more or less were always hanging about the fort, and there was a public provision of them for the use of those who followed the game with the express object of obtaining supplies. Among those who carried the weapon were some 5 or 6, who had the reputation for knowing how to use it particularly well, so well indeed as to have given them a celebrity on the frontier. Twice that number who were believed to be much better than common, and many who would have been thought expert in almost any situation but the precise one in which they now happened to be placed. The distance was 100 yards, and the weapon was to be used without a rest. The target, a board, with the customary circular lines in white paint, having the bull's-eye in the center. The first trials in skill commenced with challenges among the more ignoble of the competitors to display their steadiness and dexterity in idle competition. None but the common men engaged in this strife, which had little to interest the spectators, among whom no officer had yet appeared. Most of the soldiers were Scotch, the regiment having been raised at Stirling and its vicinity not many years before, though, as in the case of Sergeant Dunham, many Americans had joined it since its arrival in the colonies. As a matter of course, the provincials were generally the most expert marksmen, and after a desultory trial of half an hour it was necessarily conceded that a youth who had been born in the colony of New York, and who, coming of Dutch extraction, was the most expert of all who had yet tried their skill. It was just as this opinion prevailed that the oldest captain, accompanied by most of the gentlemen and ladies of the fort, appeared on the parade. A train of some 20 females of humbler condition followed, among whom was seen the well-turned form, intelligent, blooming, animated countenance, and neat, becoming attire of Mabel Dunham. Of females who were officially recognized as belonging to the class of ladies, there were but 3 in the fort, all of whom were officers' wives, Mabel being strictly, as has been stated by the quartermaster, the only real candidate for matrimony among her sex. Some little preparation had been made for the proper reception of the females, who were placed on a low staging of planks near the immediate bank of the lake. In this vicinity the prizes were suspended from a post. Great care was taken to reserve the front seat of the stage for the 3 ladies and their children, while Mabel and those who belonged to the non-commissioned officers of the regiment occupied the second. The wives and daughters of the privates were huddled together in the rear, some standing and some sitting, as they could find room. Mabel, who had already been admitted to the society of the officers' wives, on the footing of a humble companion, was a good deal noticed by the ladies in front, who had a proper appreciation of modest self-respect and gentle refinement, though they were all fully aware of the value of rank, more particularly in a garrison. As soon as this important portion of the spectators had got into their places, Lundy gave orders for the trial of skill to proceed in the manner that had been prescribed in his previous orders. Some 8 or 10 of the best marksmen of the garrison now took possession of the stand, and began to fire in succession. Among them were officers and men indiscriminately placed, nor were the casual visitors in the fort excluded from the competition. As might have been expected of men whose amusements and comfortable subsistence equally depended on skill in the use of their weapons, it was soon found that they were all sufficiently expert to hit the bull's-eye, or the white spot in the center of the target. Others who succeeded them, it is true, were less sure, their bullets striking in the different circles that surrounded the center of the target without touching it. According to the rules of the day, none could proceed to the second trial who had failed in the first, and the adjutant of the place, who acted as master of the ceremonies, or marshal of the day, called upon the successful adventurers by name to get ready for the next effort,
while he gave notice that those who failed to present themselves for the shot at the bull's-eye would necessarily be excluded from all the higher trials. Just at this moment Lundy, the quartermaster, and Jasper Eau douce appeared in the group at the stand, while the Pathfinder walked leisurely on the ground without his beloved rifle, for him a measure so unusual as to be understood by all present as a proof that he did not consider himself a competitor for the honors of the day. All made way for Major Duncan, who, as he approached the stand in a good-humored way, took his station, leveled his rifle carelessly, and fired. The bullet missed the required mark by several inches. "Major Duncan is excluded from the other trials," proclaimed the adjutant, in a voice so strong and confident that all the elder officers and the sergeants well understood that this failure was preconcerted, while all the younger gentlemen and the privates felt new encouragement to proceed on account of the evident impartiality with which the laws of the sports were administered. "Now, Mr. Eau douce, comes your turn," said Muir, "and if you do not meet the Major, I shall say that your hand is better skilled with the oar than with the rifle." Jasper's handsome face flushed. He stepped upon the stand, cast a hasty glance at Mabel, whose pretty form he ascertained was bending eagerly forward as if to note the result, dropped the barrel of his rifle with but little apparent care into the palm of his left hand, raised the muzzle for a single instant with exceeding steadiness, and fired. The bullet passed directly through the center of the bull's-eye, much the best shot of the morning, since the others had merely touched the paint. "Well performed, Mr. Jasper," said Muir, as soon as the result was declared, "in a shot that might have done credit to an older head and a more experienced eye. I'm thinking, notwithstanding, there was some of a youngster's luck in it, for you were no particular in the aim you took. You may be quick, Eau douce, in the movement, but not your philosophic nor scientific in your management of the weapon. Now, Sergeant Dunham, I'll thank you to request the ladies to give it closer attention than common, for I'm about to make that use of the rifle which may be called the intellectual. Jasper would have killed, I allow, but then there would not have been half the satisfaction in receiving such a shot as in receiving one that is discharged scientifically." All this time the quartermaster was preparing himself for the scientific trial, but he delayed his aim until he saw that the eye of Mabel, in common with those of her companions, were fastened on him in curiosity. As the others left him room, out of respect to his rank, no one stood near the competitor but his commanding officer, to whom he now said in his familiar manner, "You see, Lundy, that something is to be gained by exciting a female's curiosity. It's an active sentiment is curiosity, and properly improved may lead to gentler innovations in the end." "Very true, Davy, but you keep us all waiting while you make your preparations, and here is Pathfinder drawing near to catch a lesson from your greater experience." "Well, Pathfinder, and so you have come to get an idea, too, concerning the philosophy of shooting? I do not wish to hide my light under a bushel, and you're welcome to all you learn. Do you not mean to try a shot yourself, man?" "Why should I, Quartermaster? Why should I? I want none of the prizes, and as for honor, I have had enough of that, if it's any honor to shoot better than yourself. I'm not a woman to wear a calash." "Very true, but you might find a woman that is precious in your eyes to wear it for you, as—" "Come, Davy," interrupted the Major. "Your shot or a retreat? The adjutant is getting impatient." "The quartermaster's department and the adjutant's department are seldom compliable, Lundy, but I'm ready. Stand a little aside, Pathfinder, and give the ladies an opportunity." Lieutenant Muir now took his attitude with a good deal of studied elegance, raised his rifle slowly, lowered it, raised it again, repeated the maneuvers, and fired. "Missed the target altogether!" shouted the man whose duty it was to mark the bullets, and who had little relish for the quartermaster's tedious science. "Missed the target!" "It cannot be!" cried Muir, his face flushing equally with indignation and shame. "It cannot be, Adjutant, for I never did so awkward a thing in my life. I appeal to the ladies for a juster judgment."
"The ladies shut their eyes when you fired," exclaimed the regimental wags. "Your preparations alarmed them." "I would not believe such calumny of the leddies, nor such a reproach for my own skill," returned the quartermaster, growing more and more Scotch as he warmed with his feelings. "It's a conspiracy to rob a meritorious man of his dues." "It's a dead miss, Muir," said the laughing Lundy, "and you'll just sit down quietly with the disgrace." "No, no, Major," Pathfinder at length observed. "The quartermaster is a good shot for a slow one and a measured distance, though nothing extraordinary for real service. He has covered Jasper's bullet, as will be seen, if anyone will take the trouble to examine the target." The respect for Pathfinder's skill, and for his quickness and accuracy of sight, was so profound and general, that, the instant he made this declaration, the spectators began to distrust their own opinions, and a dozen rushed to the target in order to ascertain the fact. There, sure enough, it was found that the quartermaster's bullet had gone through the hole made by Jasper's, and that, too, so accurately as to require a minute examination to be certain of the circumstance, which, however, was soon clearly established by discovering one bullet over the other in the stump against which the target was placed. "I told you, ladies, you were about to witness the influence of science on gunnery," said the quartermaster, advancing towards the staging occupied by the females. "Major Duncan derides the idea of mathematics entering into target shooting, but I tell him philosophy colors and enlarges and improves and dilates and explains everything that belongs to human life, whether it be a shooting match or a sermon. In a word, philosophy is philosophy, and that is saying all that the subject requires." "I trust you exclude love from the catalogue," observed the wife of a captain who knew the history of the quartermaster's marriages, and who had a woman's malice against the monopolizer of her sex. "It seems that philosophy has little in common with love." "You wouldn't say that, madam, if your heart had experienced many trials. It's the man or the woman that has had many occasions to improve the affections that can best speak of such matters; and believe me, of all love, philosophical is the most lasting, as it is the most rational." "You would then recommend experience as an improvement on the passion?" "Your quick mind has conceived the idea at a glance. The happiest marriages are those in which youth and beauty and confidence on one side rely on the sagacity, moderation, and prudence of years. Middle age, I mean, madam, for I'll no deny that there is such a thing as husbands being too old for a wife. Here is Sergeant Dunham's charming daughter now, to approve of such sentiments, I'm certain, her character for discretion being already well established in the garrison, short as has been her residence among us." "Sergeant Dunham's daughter is scarcely a fitting interlocutor in a discourse between you and me, Lieutenant Muir," rejoined the captain's lady, with careful respect for her own dignity; "and yonder is the Pathfinder about to take his chance, by way of changing the subject." "I protest, Major Duncan, I protest!" cried Muir, hurrying back towards the stand, with both arms elevated by means of enforcing his words. "I protest in the strongest terms, gentlemen, against Pathfinders being admitted into these sports with killdeer, which is a piece, to say nothing of long habit, that is altogether out of proportion for a trial of skill against government rifles." "Killdeer is taking its rest, Quartermaster," returned Pathfinder calmly, "and no one here thinks of disturbing it. I did not think myself of pulling a trigger today, but Sergeant Dunham has been persuading me that I shall not do proper honor to his handsome daughter, who came in under my care, if I am backward on such an occasion. I'm using Jasper's rifle, Quartermaster, as you may see, and that is no better than your own." Lieutenant Muir was now obliged to acquiesce, and every eye turned towards the Pathfinder as he took the required station. The air and attitude of this celebrated guide and hunter were extremely fine, and as he raised his tall form and levelled the piece, showing perfect self-command, and a thorough knowledge of the power of the human frame as well as the weapon. Pathfinder was not what is usually termed a handsome man, though his appearance excited so much confidence and commanded respect. Tall, and even muscular, his frame might have been esteemed nearly perfect, were it not for the total absence of everything like flesh. Whipcord was scarcely more rigid than his arms and legs, or, at need, more pliable, but the outlines of his person were rather too angular for the proportion that the eye most approves. Still, his motions, being natural, were graceful, and being calm and regulated, they gave him an air and dignity that associated well with the idea, that was so prevalent, of his services and peculiar merits. His honest, open features were burnt to a bright red, that comported well with the notion of exposure and hardships, while his sinewy hands denoted force, and a species of use removed from the stiffening and deforming effects of labor. Although no one perceived any of those gentler or more insinuating qualities which are apt to win upon a woman's affections, as he raised his rifle, not a female eye was fastened on him without a silent approbation of the freedom of his movements and the manliness of his air. Thought was scarcely quicker than his aim, and as the smoke floated above his head, the butt end of the rifle was seen on the ground, the hand of the Pathfinder was leaning on the barrel, and his honest countenance was illuminated by his usual silent, hearty laugh. "If one dared to hint at such a thing," cried Major Duncan, "I should say that the Pathfinder had also missed the target." "No, no, Major," returned the guide confidently. "That would be a risky declaration. I didn't load the piece, and can't say what was in it, but if it was lead, you will find the bullet driving down those of the quartermaster and Jasper, else is not my name Pathfinder." A shout from the target announced the truth of this assertion. "That's not all, boys," called out the guide, who was now slowly advancing towards the stage occupied by the females. "If you find the target touched at all, I'll own to a miss. The quartermaster cut the wood, but you'll find no wood cut by that last messenger." "Very true, Pathfinder, very true," answered Muir, who was lingering near Mabel, though ashamed to address her particularly in the presence of the officers' wives. "The quartermaster did cut the wood, and by that means he opened a passage for your bullet, which went through the hole he had made. Well, quartermaster, there goes the nail, and we'll see who can drive it closer, you or I, for though I did not think of showing what a rifle can do today, now my hand is in, I'll turn my back to no man that carries King George's commission. Chingachgook is outlying, or he might force me into some of the niceties of the art. But as for you, quartermaster, if the nail don't stop you, the potato will." "You're over boastful this morning, Pathfinder, but you'll find you've no green boy fresh from the settlements and the towns to deal with, I will assure ye." "I know that well, quartermaster, I know that well, and shall not deny your experience. You lived many years on the frontiers, and I've heard of you in the colonies, and among the Indians, too, quite a human life ago." "Na, na," interrupted Muir in his broadest Scotch. "This is injustice, man. I've no lived so very long, neither." "I'll do you justice, Lieutenant, even if you get the best in the potato trial. I say you've passed a good human life, for a soldier, in places where the rifle is daily used, and I know you are a creditable and ingenious marksman, but then you are not a true rifle shooter. As for boasting, I hope I'm not a vain talker about my own exploits, but a man's gifts are his gifts, and it's flying in the face of Providence to deny them. The sergeant's daughter here shall judge between us, if you have the stomach to submit to so pretty a judge." The Pathfinder had named Mabel as the arbiter because he admired her, and because, in his eyes, rank had little or no value; but Lieutenant Muir shrank at such a reference in the presence of the wives of the officers. He would gladly keep himself constantly before the eyes and the imagination of the object of his wishes, but he was still too much under the influence of old prejudices, and perhaps too wary, to appear openly as her suitor, unless he saw something very like a certainty of success. On the discretion of Major Duncan he had a full reliance, and he apprehended no betrayal from that quarter; but he was quite aware,
should it ever get abroad that he had been refused by the child of a non-commissioned officer, he would find great difficulty in making his approaches to any other woman of a condition to which he might reasonably aspire. Notwithstanding these doubts and misgivings, Mabel looked so prettily, blushed so charmingly, smiled so sweetly, and altogether presented so winning a picture of youth, spirit, modesty, and beauty, that he found it exceedingly tempting to be kept so prominently before her imagination, and to be able to address her freely. "You shall have it your own way, Pathfinder," he answered, as soon as his doubts had settled down into determination. "Let the Sergeant's daughter, his charming daughter, I should have termed her, be the umpire then, and to her we will both dedicate the prize, that one or the other must certainly win. Pathfinder must be humoured, ladies, as you perceive, else, no doubt, we should have had the honour to submit ourselves to one of your charming society." A call for the competitors now drew the quartermaster and his adversary away, and in a few moments the second trial of skill commenced. A common wrought nail was driven lightly into the target, its head having been first touched with paint, and the marksman was required to hit it, or he lost his chances in the succeeding trials. No one was permitted to enter, on this occasion, who had already failed in the essay against the bull's-eye. There might have been half a dozen aspirants for the honors of this trial, one or two who had barely succeeded in touching the spot of paint in the previous strife, preferring to rest their reputations there, feeling certain that they could not succeed in the greater effort that was now exacted of them. The first three adventurers failed, all coming very near the mark, but neither touching it. The fourth person who presented himself was the quartermaster, who, after going through his usual attitudes, so far succeeded as to carry away a small portion of the head of the nail, planting his bullet by the side of its point. This was not considered an extraordinary shot, though it brought the adventurer within the category. "You've saved your bacon, quartermaster, as they say in the settlements of their creatures," cried Pathfinder, laughing; "but it would take a long time to build a house with a hammer no better than yours. Jasper here will show you how a nail is to be started, or the lad has lost some of his steadiness of hand and sartainty of eye. You would have done better yourself, Lieutenant, had you not been so much bent on soldierizing your figure. Shooting is a natural gift, and is to be exercised in a natural way." "We shall see, Pathfinder. I call that a pretty attempt at a nail, and I doubt if the 55th has another hammer, as you call it, that can do just the same thing over again." "Jasper is not in the 55th, but there goes his rap." As the Pathfinder spoke, the bullet of Eau douce hit the nail square, and drove it into the target, within an inch of the head. "Be all ready to clench it, boys!" cried out Pathfinder, stepping into his friend's tracks the instant they were vacant. "Never mind a new nail. I can see that, though the paint is gone, and what I can see I can hit at 100 yards, though it were only a mosquito's eye. Be ready to clench." The rifle cracked, the bullet sped its way, and the head of the nail was buried in the wood, covered by the piece of flattened lead. "Well, Jasper, lad," continued Pathfinder, dropping the butt end of his rifle to the ground, and resuming the discourse, as if he thought nothing of his own exploit, "you improve daily. A few more tramps on land in my company, and the best marksman on the frontiers will have occasion to look keenly when he takes his stand agin you. The quartermaster is respectable, but he will never get any farther, whereas you, Jasper, have the gift, and may one day defy any who pull trigger." "Hoot, hoot!" exclaimed Muir. "Do you call hitting the head of the nail respectable only, when it's the perfection of the art? Any one the least refined and elevated in sentiment knows that the delicate touches denote the master, whereas your sledge-hammer blows come from the rude and uninstructed. If a miss is as good as a mile, a hit ought to be better, Pathfinder, whether it wound or kill." "The surest way of settling this rivalry will be to make another trial," observed Lundie, "and that will be of the potato. You're Scotch, Mr. Muir, and might fare better were it a cake or a thistle, but frontier law has declared for the American fruit,
and the potato it shall be." As Major Duncan manifested some impatience of manner, Muir had too much tact to delay the sports any longer with his discursive remarks, but judiciously prepared himself for the next appeal. To say the truth, the quartermaster had little or no faith in his own success in the trial of skill that was to follow, nor would he have been so free in presenting himself as a competitor at all, had he anticipated it would have been made. But Major Duncan, who was somewhat of a humorist in his own quiet Scotch way, had secretly ordered it to be introduced expressly to mortify him, for, a laird himself, Lundy did not relish the notion that one who might claim to be a gentleman should bring a discredit on his caste by forming an unequal alliance. As soon as everything was prepared, Muir was summoned to the stand, and the potato was held in readiness to be thrown. As the sort of feat we are about to offer to the reader, however, may be new to him, a word in explanation will render the matter more clear. A potato of large size was selected, and given to one who stood at the distance of 20 yards from the stand. At the word "heave," which was given by the marksman, the vegetable was thrown with a gentle toss into the air, and it was the business of the adventurer to cause a ball to pass through it before it touched the ground. The quartermaster, in 100 experiments, had once succeeded in accomplishing this difficult feat, but he now essayed to perform it again, with a sort of blind hope that was fated to be disappointed. The potato was thrown in the usual manner, the rifle was discharged, but the flying target was untouched.
"To the right about and fall out, quartermaster," said Lundy, smiling at the success of the artifice. "The honor of the silken calash will lie between Jasper Eau douce and Pathfinder." "And how is the trial to end, Major?" inquired the latter. "Are we to have 2 potato trial, or is it to be settled by centre and skin?" "By centre and skin, if there is any perceptible difference. Otherwise, the double shot must follow."
"This is an awful moment to me, Pathfinder," observed Jasper as he moved towards the stand, his face actually losing its color and intensity of feeling. Pathfinder gazed earnestly at the young man, and then, begging Major Duncan to have patience for a moment, he led his friend out of the hearing of all near him before he spoke. "You seem to take this matter to heart, Jasper?" the hunter remarked, keeping his eyes fastened on those of the youth. "I must own, Pathfinder, that my feelings were never before so much bound up in success." "And do you so much crave to outdo me, an old and tried friend? And that, as it might be, in my own way? Shooting is my gift, boy, and no common hand can equal mine." I know it, Pathfinder, but yet—" "But what, Jasper, boy? Speak freely, you talk to a friend." The young man compressed his lips, dashed a hand across his eye, and flushed and paled alternately, like a girl confessing her love. Then, squeezing the other's hand, he said calmly, like one whose manhood has overcome all other sensations, "I would lose an arm, Pathfinder, to be able to make an offering of that calash to Mabel Dunham." The hunter dropped his eyes to the ground, and as he walked slowly back towards the stand, he seemed to ponder deeply on what he had just heard. "You never could succeed in the double trial, Jasper," he suddenly remarked. "Of that I am certain, and it troubles me."
"What a creature is mortal man! He pines for things which are not of his gift, and treats the bounties of Providence lightly. No matter, no matter. Take your station, Jasper, for the Major is waiting, and hearken, lad, I must touch the skin, for I could not show my face in the garrison with less than that."
"I suppose I must submit to my fate," returned Jasper, flushing and losing his color as before. "But I will make the effort, if I die."
"What a thing is mortal man!" repeated Pathfinder, falling back to allow his friend room to take his aim. "He overlooks his own gifts, and craves those of another." The potato was thrown, Jasper fired, and the shout that followed preceded the announcement of the fact that he had driven his bullet through its center, or so nearly so as to merit that award.
Here is a competitor worthy of you, Pathfinder," cried Major Duncan with delight, as the former took his station, "and we may look to some fine shooting in the double trial." "What a thing is mortal man!" repeated the hunter, scarcely seeming to notice what was passing around him, so much were his thoughts absorbed in his own reflections. "Toss!" The potato was tossed, the rifle cracked. It was remarked just as the little black ball seemed stationary in the air, for the marksman evidently took unusual heed to his aim, and then a look of disappointment and wonder succeeded among those who had caught the falling target. "2 holes in one?" called out the Major. "The skin! The skin!" was the answer. "Only the skin!" "How's that, Pathfinder? Is Jasper Eau douce to carry off the honors of the day?" "The calash is his," returned the other, shaking his head and walking quietly away from the stand. What a creature is mortal man! Never satisfied with his own gifts, but forever craving that which Providence denies. As Pathfinder had not buried his bullet in the potato, but had cut through the skin, the prize was immediately adjudged to Jasper. The calash was in the hands of the latter when the quartermaster approached, and with a polite air of cordiality he wished his successful rival joy of his victory. "But now you've got the calash, lad, it's of no use to you," he added. "It will never make a sail, nor even an ensign. I'm thinking, Eau douce, you'll not be sorry to see its value in good siller of the king." "Money cannot buy it, Lieutenant," returned Jasper, whose eye lighted with all the fire of success and joy. "I would rather have won this calash than have obtained 50 new suits of sails for the Scud." "Hoot, hoot, lad! You're going mad, like all the rest of them. I'd even venture to offer half a guinea for the trifle, rather than it should lie kicking about in the cabin of your cutter, and in the end become an ornament for the head of a squaw." Although Jasper did not know that the wary quartermaster had not offered half the actual cost of the prize, he heard the proposition with indifference. Shaking his head in the negative, he advanced towards the stage, where his approach excited a little commotion, the officers' ladies, one and all, having determined to accept the present, should the gallantry of the young sailor induce him to offer it. But Jasper's diffidence, no less than admiration for another, would have prevented him from aspiring to the honor of complimenting any whom he thought so much his superiors. "Mabel," said he, "this prize is for you, unless—" "Unless what, Jasper?" answered the girl, losing her own bashfulness in the natural and generous wish to relieve his embarrassment, though both reddened in a way to betray strong feeling. "Unless you think too indifferently of it, because it is offered by one who may have no right to believe his gift will be accepted." "I do accept it, Jasper, and it shall be a sign of the danger I have passed in your company, and of the gratitude I feel for your care of me, your care, and that of the Pathfinder." Never mind me, never mind me!" exclaimed the latter. "This is Jasper's luck, and Jasper's gift. Give him full credit for both. My turn may come another day, mine and the quartermaster's, who seems to grudge the boy the calash, though what he can want of it I cannot understand, for he has no wife." "And has Jasper Eau douce a wife? Or have you a wife yourself, Pathfinder? I may want it to help to get a wife, or as a memorial that I have had a wife, or as proof how much I admire the sex, or because it is a female garment, or for some other equally respectable motive. It's not the unreflecting that are the most prized by the thoughtful, and there is no surer sign that a man made a good husband to his first consort, let me tell you all, than to see him speedily looking round for a competent successor. The affections are good gifts from Providence, and they that have loved one faithfully proved how much of this bounty has been lavished upon them by loving another as soon as possible. It may be so, it may be so. I am no practitioner in such things, and cannot gainsay it. But Mabel here, the sergeant's daughter, will give you full credit for the words. Come, Jasper, although our hands are out, let us see what the other lads can do with the rifle." Pathfinder and his companions retired, for the sports were about to proceed.
The ladies, however, were not so much engrossed with rifle shooting as to neglect the calash. It passed from hand to hand, the silk was felt, the fashion criticized, and the work examined, and divers opinions were privately ventured concerning the fitness of so handsome a thing passing into the possession of a non-commissioned officer's child.
"Perhaps you will be disposed to sell that calash, Mabel, when it has been a short time in your possession?" inquired the captain's lady. "Wear it, I should think, you never can." "I may not wear it, madam," returned our heroine modestly, "but I should not like to part with it either." "I dare say Sergeant Dunham keeps you above the necessity of selling your clothes, child, but at the same time it is money thrown away to keep an article of dress you can never wear." "I should be unwilling to part with the gift of a friend." "But the young man himself will think all the better of you for your prudence after the triumph of the day is forgotten. It is a pretty and a becoming calash, and ought not to be thrown away." "I've no intention to throw it away, ma'am, and, if you please, would rather keep it." "As you will, child. Girls of your age often overlook the real advantages. Remember, however, if you do determine to dispose of the thing, that it is bespoke, and that I will not take it if you ever even put it on your own head." "Yes, ma'am," said Mabel, in the meekest voice imaginable, though her eyes looked like diamonds, and her cheeks reddened to the tints of two roses, as she placed the forbidden garment over her well-turned shoulders, where she kept it a minute, as if to try its fitness, and then quietly removed it again. The remainder of the sports offered nothing of interest. The shooting was reasonably good, but the trials were all of a scale lower than those related, and the competitors were soon left to themselves. The ladies and most of the officers withdrew, and the remainder of the females soon followed their example. Mabel was returning along the low flat rocks that lined the shore of the lake, dangling her pretty calash from a prettier finger, when Pathfinder met her. He carried the rifle which he had used that day, but his manner had less of the frank ease of the hunter about it than usual, while his eye seemed roving and uneasy. After a few unmeaning words concerning the noble sheet of water before them, he turned towards his companion with strong interest in his countenance, and said, "Jasper earned that calash for you, Mabel, without much trial of his gifts." "It was fairly done, Pathfinder."
"No doubt, no doubt. The bullet passed neatly through the potato, and no man could have done more, though others might have done as much."
"But no one did as much!" exclaimed Mabel, with an animation that she instantly regretted, for she saw by the pained look of the guide that he was mortified equally by the remark and by the feeling with which it was uttered. It is true, Mabel, no one did as much then, but yet there is no reason I should deny my gifts which come from Providence. Yes, no one did as much there, but you shall know what can be done here. Do you observe the gulls that are flying over our heads?" "Certainly, Pathfinder. There are too many to escape notice." "Here, where they cross each other in sailing about," he added, cocking and raising his rifle. The two. Now look!" The piece was presented quick as thought, as two of the birds came in a line, though distant from each other many yards. The report followed, and the bullet passed through the bodies of both victims. No sooner had the gulls fallen into the lake than Pathfinder dropped the butt end of the rifle, and laughed in his own peculiar manner, every shade of dissatisfaction and mortified pride having left his honest face. "That is something, Mabel, that is something, although I have no calash to give you. But ask Jasper himself. I'll leave it all to Jasper, for a truer tongue and heart are not in America." "Then it was not Jasper's fault that he gained the prize?" "Not it. He did his best, and he did well. For one that has water gifts, rather than land gifts, Jasper is uncommonly expert, and a better backer no one need wish, ashore or afloat. But it was my fault, Mabel, that he got the calash, though it makes no difference. It makes no difference, for the thing has gone to the right person." "I believe I understand you, Pathfinder,"
said Mabel, blushing in spite of herself, "and I look upon the calash as the joint gift of yourself and Jasper." "That would not be doing justice to the lad, neither. He won the garment, and had a right to give it away. The most you may think, Mabel, is to believe that, had I won it, it would have gone to the same person." "I will remember that, Pathfinder, and take care that others know your skill, as has been proved upon the poor gulls in my presence." "Lord bless you, Mabel! There is no more need of your talking in favor of my shooting on this frontier, than of your talking about the water in the lake or the sun in the heavens. Everybody knows what I can do in that way, and your words would be thrown away, as much as French would be thrown away on an American bear."
"Then you think that Jasper knew you were giving him this advantage, of which he had so unhandsomely availed himself?" said Mabel, the color which had imparted so much luster to her eyes gradually leaving her face, which became grave and thoughtful.
"I do not say that, but very far from it. We all forget things that we have known, when eager after our wishes. Jasper is satisfied that I can pass one bullet through two potatoes, as I sent my bullet through the gulls, and he knows no other man on the frontier can do the same thing. But with the calash before his eyes, and the hope of giving it to you, the lad was inclined to think better of himself, just at that moment, perhaps, than he ought. No, there's nothing mean or distrustful about Jasper Eau douce, though it is a gift natural to all young men to wish to appear well in the eyes of handsome young women."
"I'll try to forget all but the kindness you've both shown to a poor motherless girl," said Mabel, struggling to keep down emotions she scarcely knew how to account for herself. "Believe me, Pathfinder, I can never forget all you have already done for me, you and Jasper, and this new proof of your regard is not thrown away. Here is a brooch that is of silver, and I offer it as a token that I owe you life or liberty."
"What shall I do with this, Mabel?" asked the bewildered hunter, holding the simple trinket in his hand. "I have neither buckle nor button about me, for I wear nothing but leathern strings, and them of good deerskins. It's pretty to the eye, but it is prettier far on the spot it came from than it can be about me."
"Nay, put it on your hunting shirt, it will become it well. Remember, Pathfinder, that it is a token of friendship between us, and a sign that I can never forget you or your services." Mabel then smiled an adieu, and bounding up the bank she was soon lost to view behind the mound of the fort. End of chapter. Chapter 12 of The Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 12. Lo, dusky masses steal in dubious sight along the leaguered wall and bristling bank of the armed river, while with straggling light the stars peep through the vapor, dim and dank. Attributed to Byron. A few hours later, Mabel Dunham was on the bastion that overlooked the river and the lake, seemingly in deep thought. The evening was calm and soft, and the question had arisen whether the party for the Thousand Islands would be able to get out that night or not, on account of the total absence of wind. The stores, arms, and ammunition were already shipped, and even Mabel's effects were on board, but the small draft of men that was to go was still ashore, there being no apparent prospect of the cutter's getting under way. Jasper had warped the Scud out of the cove, and so far up the stream as to enable him to pass through the outlet of the river whenever he chose, but there he still lay, riding at single anchor. The drafted men were lounging about the shore of the cove, undecided whether or not to pull off. The sports of the morning had left a quiet in the garrison which was in harmony with the whole of the beautiful scene, and Mabel felt its influence on her feelings,
though probably too little accustomed to speculate on such sensations to be aware of the cause. Everything near appeared lovely and soothing, while the solemn grandeur of the silent forest and placid expanse of the lake lent a sublimity that other scenes might have wanted. For the first time, Mabel felt the hold that the towns and civilization had gained on her habits sensibly weakened, and the warm-hearted girl began to think that a life passed amid objects such as those around her might be happy. How far the experience of the last days came in aid of the calm and holy eventide, and contributed towards producing that young conviction, may be suspected rather than affirmed in this early portion of our legend. "A charming sunset, Mabel," said the hearty voice of her uncle, so close to the ear of our heroine as to cause her to start. "A charming sunset, girl, for a freshwater concern, though we should think but little of it at sea."
"And is not nature the same on shore or at sea, on a lake like this or on the ocean? Does not the sun shine on all alike, dear uncle? And can we not feel gratitude for the blessings of Providence as strongly on this remote frontier as in our own Manhattan?"
The girl has fallen in with some of her mother's books. Is not nature the same, indeed? Now, Mabel, do you imagine that the nature of a soldier is the same as that of a seafaring man? You have relations in both callings, and ought to be able to answer."
"But, uncle, I mean human nature."
"So do I, girl. The human nature of a seaman, and the human nature of one of those fellows of the 55th, not even excepting your own father. Here have they had a shooting match, target firing I should call it, this day, and what a different thing has it been from a target firing afloat. There we should have sprung out our broadside, sported with round shot, at an object half a mile off at the very nearest, and the potatoes, if there happened to be any on board, as very likely would not have been the case, would have been left in the cook's coppers. It may be an honorable calling, that of a soldier, Mabel, but an experienced hand sees many follies and weaknesses in one of these forts. As for that bit of a lake, you know my opinion of that already, and I wish to disparage nothing. No real seafarer disparages anything, but damn me if I regard this here Ontario, as they call it, as more than so much water in a ship's scuttle-butt. Now look you here, Mabel, if you wish to understand the difference between the ocean and a lake, I can make you comprehend it with a single look. This is what one may call a calm, seeing that there is no wind, though, to own the truth, I do not think the calms are as calm as them we get outside."
"Uncle, there is not a breath of air. I do not think it possible for the leaves to be more immovably still than those of the entire forest are at this very moment."
"Leaves? What are leaves, child? There are no leaves at sea. If you wish to know whether it is a dead calm or not, try a mould candle. Your dip's flaring too much, and then you may be certain whether there is or is not any wind. If you were in a latitude where the air was so still that you found a difficulty in stirring it to draw it in breathing, you might fancy it a calm. People are often on a short allowance of air in the calm latitudes. Here again, look at that water. It is like milk in a pan, with no more motion now than there is in a full hogshead before the bung is started. On the ocean the water is never still, let the air be as quiet as it may."
"The water of the ocean never still, Uncle Cap, not even in a calm?"
"Bless your heart, no, child. The ocean breathes like a living being, and its bosom is always heaving, as the poetsers call it, though there be no more air than there is to be found in a siphon. No man ever saw the ocean still like this lake, but it heaves and sets as if it had lungs."
"And this lake is not absolutely still, for you perceive there is a little ripple on the shore, and you may even hear the surf plunging at moments against the rocks."
"All damned poetry! Lake Ontario is no more the Atlantic than a Powell's Hook Periagila is a first-rate. That Jasper, notwithstanding, is a fine lad, and wants instruction only to make a man of him."
"Do you think him ignorant, uncle?"
answered Mabel, prettily adjusting her hair, in order to do which she was obliged, or fancied she was obliged, to turn away her face. "To me Jasper Eau douce appears to know more than most of the young men of his class. He has read but little, for books are not plenty in this part of the world, but he has thought much, at least, so it seems to me, for one so young."
"He is ignorant, as all must be who navigate an inland water like this. No, no, Mabel, we both owe something to Jasper and the Pathfinder, and I have been thinking how I can best serve them, for I hold ingratitude to be the vice of a hog. For treat the animal to your own dinner, and he would eat you for the dessert."
"Very true, dear uncle. We ought indeed to do all we can to express our proper sense of the services of both these brave men."
"Spoken like your mother's daughter, girl, and in a way to do credit to the Cap family. Now, I've hit upon a traverse that will just suit all parties, and as soon as we get back from this little expedition down the lake among them there 1,000 islands, and I am ready to return, it is my intention to propose it."
"Dearest uncle, this is so considerate in you, and will be so just. May I ask what your intentions are?"
"I see no reason for keeping them a secret from you, Mabel, though nothing need be said to your father about them, for the Sergeant has his prejudices, and might throw difficulties in the way. Neither Jasper nor his friend Pathfinder can ever make anything hereabouts, and I propose to take both with me down to the coast, and get them fairly afloat. Jasper would find his sea legs in a fortnight, and a 12-month voyage would make him a man, although Pathfinder might take more time, or never get to be rated able, yet one could make something of him, too, particularly as a lookout, for he has unusually good eyes."
"Uncle, do you think either would consent to this?" said Mabel, smiling.
"Do I suppose them simpletons? What rational being would neglect his own advancement? Let Jasper alone to push his way, and the lad may yet die the master of some square-rigged craft."
"And would he be any the happier for it, dear uncle? How much better is it to be the master of a square-rigged craft than to be the master of a round-rigged craft?"
"Pooh, pooh, Magnet! You are just fit to read lectures about ships before some hysterical society. You don't know what you're talking about. Leave these things to me, and they'll be properly managed. Ha! Here is the Pathfinder himself, and I may just as well drop him a hint of my benevolent intentions as regards himself. Hope is a great encourager of our exertions."
Cap nodded his head, and then ceased to speak, while the hunter approached, not with his usual frank and easy manner, but in a way to show that he was slightly embarrassed, if not distrustful of his reception.
"Uncle and niece make a family party," said Pathfinder, when near the two, "and a stranger may not prove a welcome companion?" "You are no stranger, Master Pathfinder," returned Cap, "and no one can be more welcome than yourself. We were talking of you but a moment ago, and when friends speak of an absent man, he can guess what they have said." "I ask no secrets. Every man has his enemies, and I have mine, though I count neither you, Master Cap, nor pretty Mabel here among the number. As for the Mingos, I will say nothing, though they have no just cause to hate me." "That I'll answer for, Pathfinder, for you strike my fancy as being well disposed and upright. There is a method, however, of getting away from the enmity of even these Mingos, and if you choose to take it, no one will more willingly point it out than myself, without a charge for my advice either."
"I wish no enemies, Saltwater," for so the Pathfinder had begun to call Cap, having, insensibly to himself, adopted the term, by translating the name given him by the Indians in and about the fort. "I wish no enemies. I'm as ready to bury the hatchet with the Mingos as with the French, though you know that it depends on one greater than either of us so to turn the heart as to leave a man without enemies." "By lifting your anchor and accompanying me down to the coast, friend Pathfinder, when we get back from this short cruise on which we are bound, you will find yourself beyond the sound of the war whoop, and safe enough from any Indian bullet." "And what should I do on the salt water? Hunt in your towns?
Follow the trails of people going and coming from market, and ambush dogs and poultry? You are no friend to my happiness, Master Cap, if you would leave me out of the shades of the woods, to put me in the sun of the clearings." "I do not propose to leave you in the settlements, Pathfinder, but to carry you out to sea, where a man can only be said to breathe freely. Mabel will tell you that such was my intention, before a word was said on the subject." "And what does Mabel think would come of such a change? She knows that a man has his gifts, and that it is as useless to pretend to others as to withstand them that come from Providence. I am a hunter, and a scout, and a guide, Saltwater, and it is not in me to fly so much in the face of heaven as to try to become anything else. Am I right, Mabel? Or are you so much a woman as to wish to see a nature altered?" "I would wish to see no change in you, Pathfinder," Mabel answered, with a cordial sincerity and frankness that went directly to the hunter's heart. "And much as my uncle admires the sea, and great as is all the good that he thinks may come of it, I could not wish to see the best and noblest hunter of the woods transformed into an admiral. Remain what you are, my brave friend, and you need fear nothing short of the anger of God." "Do you hear this, Saltwater? Do you hear what the sergeant's daughter is saying? And she is much too upright and fair-minded and pretty not to think what she says. So long as she is satisfied with me as I am, I shall not fly in the face of the gifts of Providence by striving to become anything else. I may seem useless here in a garrison, but when we get down among the Thousand Islands, there may be an opportunity to prove that a sure rifle is sometimes a godsend." "You are then to be of our party?" said Mabel, smiling so frankly and so sweetly on the guide that he would have followed her to the end of the earth. "I shall be the only female, with the exception of one soldier's wife, and shall feel none the less secure, Pathfinder, because you will be among our protectors." "The sergeant would do that, Mabel, though you were not his kin. No one will overlook you. I should think your uncle here would like an expedition of this sort, where we shall go with sails and have a look at an inland sea?" "Your inland sea is no great matter, Master Pathfinder, and I expect nothing from it. I confess, however, I should like to know the object of the cruise, for one does not wish to be idle, and my brother-in-law, the sergeant, is as close-mouthed as a Freemason. Do you know, Mabel, what all this means?" "Not in the least, uncle. I dare not ask my father any questions about his duty, for he thinks it is not a woman's business, and all I can say is, that we are to sail as soon as the wind will permit, and that we are to be absent a month." "Perhaps Master Pathfinder can give me a useful hint, for a voyage without an object is never pleasant to an old sailor." "There is no great secret, Saltwater, concerning our port and object, though it is forbidden to talk much about either in the garrison. I am no soldier, however, and can use my tongue as I please, though as little given as another to idle conversation. I hope, still, as we sail so soon, and you are both to be of the party, you may as well be told where you are to be carried. You know that there are such things as the Thousand Islands, I suppose, Master Cap?" "Ay, what are so-called hereaway, though I take it for granted that they are not real islands, such as we fall in with on the ocean, and that the 1,000 means some such matter as 2 or 3. My eyes are good, and yet have I often been foiled in trying to count them very islands." Ay, I've known people who couldn't count beyond a certain number. Your real land birds never know their own roosts, even in a landfall at sea. How many times have I seen the beach, and houses and churches, when the passengers have not been able to see anything but water? I have no idea that a man can get fairly out of sight of land on fresh water. The thing appears to me to be irrational and impossible." "You don't know the lakes, Master Cap, or you would not say that. Before we get to the Thousand Islands, you will have other notions of what nature has done in this wilderness." "I have my doubts whether you have such a thing as a real island in all this region." "We'll show you hundreds of them. Not exactly 1,000, perhaps, but so many that eye cannot see them all, nor tongue count them."
I'll engage, when the truth comes to be known, they'll turn out to be nothing but peninsulas, or promontories, or continents, though these are matters, I dare say, of which you know little or nothing. But, islands or no islands, what is the object of the cruise, Master Pathfinder?" "There can be no harm in giving you some idea of what we are going to do. Being so old a sailor, Master Cap, you've heard, no doubt, of such a port as Frontenac?" "Who hasn't? I will not say I've ever been inside the harbor, but I've frequently been off the place." "Then you are about to go upon ground with which you are acquainted. These great lakes, you must know, make a chain, the water passing out of one into the other, until it reaches Erie, which is a sheet off here to the westward, as large as Ontario itself. Well, out of Erie the water comes, until it reaches a low mountain lake, over the edge of which it passes." "I should like to know how the devil it can do that." "Why, easy enough, Master Cap," returned Pathfinder, laughing, "seeing that it is only to fall downhill. Had I said the water went up the mountain, there would have been nature agin it; but we hold it no great matter for water to run downhill, that is, fresh water." "Ay, ay, but you speak of the water of a lake's coming down the side of a mountain. It's in the teeth of reason, if reason has any teeth." "Well, well, we will not dispute the point. But what I've seen, I've seen. After getting into Ontario, all the water of all the lakes passes down into the sea by a river, and in the narrow part of the sheet, where it is neither river nor lake, lie the islands spoken of. Now Frontenac is a post of the Frenchers above these same islands, and, as they hold the garrison below, their stores and ammunition are sent up the river to Frontenac, to be forwarded along the shores of this and the other lakes, in order to enable the enemy to play his devilries among the savages, and to take Christian scalps." "And will our presence prevent these horrible acts?" demanded Mabel, with interest. "It may or it may not, as Providence wills. Lundy, as they call him, he who commands this garrison, sent a party down to take a station among the islands, to cut off some of the French boats, and this expedition of ours will be the second relief. As yet they've not done much, though 2 bateaux loaded with Indian goods have been taken; but a runner came in last week and brought such tidings that the Major is about to make a last effort to circumvent the knaves. Jasper knows the way, and we shall be in good hands, for the Sergeant is prudent, and of the first quality at an ambushment. Yes, he is both prudent and alert." "Is this all?" said Cap contemptuously. "By the preparations and equipments, I had thought there was to be a forced trade in the wind, and that an honest penny might be turned by taking an adventure. I suppose there are no shares in your freshwater prize money?" "Anan?" "I take it for granted the king gets all in these soldiering parties, and ambushments, as you call them." "I know nothing about that, Master Cap. I take my share of the lead and powder if any falls into our hands, and say nothing to the king about it. If anyone fares better, it is not I, though it is time I did begin to think of a house and furniture and a home." Although the Pathfinder did not dare to look at Mabel while he made this direct allusion to his change of life, he would have given the world to know whether she was listening, and what was the expression of her countenance. Mabel little suspected the nature of the allusion, however, and her countenance was perfectly unembarrassed as she turned her eyes towards the river, where the appearance of some movement on board the Scud began to be visible. "Jasper is bringing the cutter out," observed the guide, whose look was drawn in the same direction by the fall of some heavy article on the deck. "The lad sees the signs of wind, no doubt, and wishes to be ready for it." "Ay, now we shall have an opportunity of learning seamanship," returned Cap with a sneer. "There is a nicety in getting a craft under her canvas that shows the thoroughbred mariner as much as anything else. It's like a soldier buttoning his coat, and one can see whether he begins at the top or the bottom." "I will not say that Jasper is equal to your seafarers below," observed Pathfinder, across whose upright mind an unworthy feeling of envy or of jealousy never passed.
But he is a bold boy, and manages his cutter as skilfully as any man could desire, on this lake, at least. You didn't find him backwards at the Oswego Falls, Master Cap, where fresh water contrives to tumble downhill with little difficulty." Cap made no other answer than a dissatisfied ejaculation, and then a general silence followed, all on the bastion studying the movements of the cutter with the interest that was natural to their own future connection with the vessel. It was still a dead calm, the surface of the lake literally glittering with the last rays of the sun. The Scud had been warped up to a kedge that lay 100 yards above the points of the outlet, where she had room to maneuver in the river which then formed the harbor of Oswego. But the total want of air prevented any such attempt, and it was soon evident that the light vessel was to be taken through the passage under her sweeps. Not a sail was loosened, but as soon as the kedge was tripped, the heavy fall of the sweeps was heard, when the cutter, with her head up-stream, began to sheer towards the centre of the current, on reaching which the efforts of the men ceased, and she drifted towards the outlet. In the narrow pass itself her movement was rapid, and in less than 5 minutes the Scud was floating outside of the 2 low gravelly points which intercepted the waves of the lake. No anchor was let go, but the vessel continued to set out from the land, until her dark hull was seen resting on the glossy surface of the lake, full 1/4 mile beyond the low bluff which formed the eastern extremity of what might be called the outer harbor or roadstead. Here the influence of the river current ceased, and she became virtually stationary.
"She seems very beautiful to me, uncle," said Mabel, whose gaze had not been averted from the cutter for a single moment while it had thus been changing its position. "I dare say you can find faults in her appearance and in the way she is managed, but to my ignorance both are perfect."
Ay, she drops down with the current well enough, girl, and so would a chip. But when you come to niceties, all old tar like myself has no need of spectacles to find fault." "Well, Master Cap," put in the guide, who seldom heard anything to Jasper's prejudice without manifesting a disposition to interfere, "I've heard old and experienced salt-water mariners confess that the Scud is as pretty a craft as floats. I know nothing of such matters myself, but one may have his own notions about a ship, even though they be wrong notions, and it would take more than one witness to persuade me Jasper does not keep his boat in good order." "I do not say the cutter is downright lubberly, Master Pathfinder, but she has faults, and great faults."
"And what are they, uncle? If he knew them, Jasper would be glad to mend them."
"What are they? Why, 50, ay, for that matter 100, very material and manifest faults."
"Do name them, sir, and Pathfinder will mention them to his friend."
"Name them! It is no easy matter to call off the stars, for the simple reason that they are so numerous. Name them, indeed! Why, my pretty niece, Miss Magnet, what do you think of that main boom now? To my ignorant eyes, it is topped at least a foot too high, and then the pennant is foul, and ay, damn me if there isn't a topsail gasket adrift, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if there should be a round turn in that hawser if the kedge were to be let go this instant. Faults indeed! No seaman could look at her a moment without seeing that she is as full of faults as a servant who has asked for his discharge."
"This may be very true, uncle, though I much question if Jasper knows of them. I don't think he would suffer these things, Pathfinder, if they were once pointed out to him."
"Let Jasper manage his own cutter, Mabel. His gift lies that-a-way, and I'll answer for it, for no one can teach him how to keep the Scud out of the hands of the Frontenackers or their devilish Mingo friends. His gift lies that-a-way, and I'll answer for it. No one can teach him how to keep the Scud out of the hands of the Frontenackers or their devilish Mingo friends. Who cares for round turns in kedges, and for hawsers that are topped too high, Master Cap, so long as the craft sails well and keeps clear of the Frenchers? I will trust Jasper against all the seafarers of the coast up here on the lakes, but I don't say he has any gift for the ocean, for there he has never been tried." Cap smiled condescendingly, and he did not think it necessary to push his criticisms any further just at that moment. By this time the cutter had begun to drift at the mercy of the currents of the lake, her head turning in all directions, though slowly, and not in a way to attract particular attention. Just at this moment the jib was loosened and hoisted, and presently the canvas swelled towards the land, though no evidences of air was yet to be seen on the surface of the water. Slight, however, as was the impulsion, the light hull yielded, and in another minute the Scud was seen standing across the current of the river with a movement so easy and moderate as to be scarcely perceptible. When out of the stream she struck an eddy and shot up towards the land, under the eminence where the fort stood when Jasper dropped his kedge. "Not lubberly done," muttered Cap in a sort of soliloquy. "Not over lubberly, though we should have put his helm a starboard instead of a port, for a vessel ought always to come to with her head off shore, whether she is a league from the land or only a cable's length, since it has a careful look, and looks are something in this world."
"Jasper is a handy lad,"
suddenly observed Sergeant Dunham at his brother-in-law's elbow,
"and we place great reliance on his skill in our expeditions. But come, one and all, we have but half an hour more of daylight to embark in, and the boats will be ready for us by the time we are ready for them."
On this intimation the whole party separated, each to find those trifles which had not been shipped already. A few taps of the drum gave the necessary signal to the soldiers, and in a minute all were in motion. End of chapter.